Good evening and welcome to Civic Media's coverage of the Cap Times 2025 Idea Fest. Tonight, live from UW-Madison's Memorial Union, we will hear conversations with writer Evan Osnos and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, both moderated by David Maraniss. At 7 o'clock following Osnos' remarks, Todd Albaugh of The Todd Albaugh Show will join us for some Idea Fest recap and analysis. Then at 7:30, Governor Walz will take the stage. We go now live to Memorial Union for Cap Times Idea Fest.
Good evening. It's so good to see so many of you here this early. There's always exciting traffic in Madison on a Friday night, and we know how hard it is to get here, so we're thrilled you're here early, and welcome. This is the 5th day of Cap Times Idea Fest, and we're excited that you're here. As I've said all week, your attendance is so important to us to support the Capital Times and the news and opinion journalism we've been doing in this town since 1917. And I just want to keep repeating that every time I'm out here. If you're not already, consider becoming a Cap Times member. One of our plans for the future is to do more events and more member-only and member-first events. So in addition to supporting us, if you're interested in events like this, you might consider membership. Please note our sponsors listed on the banners behind me. They, like your tickets, make this week all it is. And so I will just point out and thank them for their support. Our previous speakers this week have felt the topics have seemed really incredibly timely, not always all optimistic, but incredibly timely. Even though I just met Evan Osnos for the first time backstage, I feel like he's an old friend because I've listened to him so long with his wonderful podcast, the Political Hour, with the New Yorker, and I've been a huge and long-time fan. Evan is a celebrated New Yorker political reporter and author whose latest book was published in June. I got an advance copy and read it, and it's for sale in the lobby, and I believe he'll be signing copies after this session and also after the Tim Walz session tonight. It's titled The Have and Have Yachts, Dispatches of the Ultra-Rich. It's a collection of essays published in the New Yorker that Evan has revised and expanded to tell the story of how the ultra-rich now hold more of America's wealth than even in the heyday of the Carnegies and the Rockefellers. In it, Evan recalls Donald Trump's inauguration last January in a scene he described as instantly indelible. The world watched American politics embrace plutocracy without shame or pretense, he wrote. Before joining the New Yorker, Evan worked as the Beijing bureau chief for the Chicago Tribune and was part of teams that won a Pulitzer Prize in 2001 and 2008. Prior to his China assignment, he reported from the Middle East, mostly from Iraq. Among his other books was a 2020 biography of former President Joe Biden. In 2021, and we were talking about this in the green room, he published a best-selling book titled Wildland, The Making of America's Fury, in which he wrote about how the United States seemed to have changed in the many years he spent abroad, no longer appearing to be as committed to the rule of law, the sanctity of truth, and equal opportunity as when he left. That resonates with all of us now. As I said, Evan is a regular, if I mispronounced it earlier, on the New Yorker podcast titled The Political Scene. It's one of my favorites. His New York podcast partners are Jane Mayer, who was here in 2021, and Susan Glasser, who was here with her husband Peter Baker last year. We were joking downstairs that we've completed our match set of podcasters, and now our goal will be to get them to Madison at the same time, maybe on the stage next year or sometime soon. I just wanted to give one more pitch for the podcast. I just find it to be fascinating and absent of the kind of off-putting hyperbole so common on podcasts. So David Maraniss, who's been here all week and played a huge part, invited Evan to Madison, and he'll be the moderator tonight. So with that, would you please welcome Evan and David to the stage? Thank you.
Hello again, and again, and again, and again. I'm sick of my own voice by now, but I'm delighted to be with an Osnos. I've known Osnoses since Evan was an infant. When I got to the Washington Post in 1977, his dad, Peter, was already a legend there, and he was in Moscow at that point, but I got to know him as an editor on the national staff. And my favorite Osnos story of all time is when I was the Southwest Bureau Chief for the Washington Post in Austin, and I went up to Dallas because Prince Charles was there. So I'm doing the story about Prince Charles, and he's meeting various people, and then he looks over and sees me and says, "Are you the Washington Post correspondent?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I want to tell you that Peter Osnos, people come up to him and call him Prince Charles because he looks so much like Prince Charles."
It's uncanny.
It truly is. And when your dad, when I told him that story, boy, was he happy.
He remains pleased. He doesn't even know you're telling it, but somewhere a warm glow is passing over him, and he doesn't know what.
So now that he's King Charles, I guess your dad is King Peter.
Oh, he's so pleased right now. My dad is so thrilled by that. So
which means we have to call you Prince Evan.
Well, Dad, I have to say, I can take to that, actually. I have to say, it is, as the other half of this prenatal friendship with David Maraniss, when David Maraniss sends you an email, even before you read it, you say, "Yes, whatever it is, I want to do it, I want to see you, I want to chat." So it is a great thrill to be here with you.
Thank you, Evan.
And thank you all for coming on a beautiful night outside.
Right. So Evan is one of the many guests we've had who came in from Washington. And each one of them I have asked what it's been like there the last 3 weeks with sort of this mall cops police state. What have you seen and how would you describe it?
Do I have to go back? I mean, really? You see, I'm beaming at the experience of being out of Washington. It has been a very curious occasion because, let's be honest, the sight of the National Guard patrolling downtown, and I will point out, they are strangely patrolling around the monuments and some of the safest places. I think they're keeping the monuments safe from the tourists or the tourists safe from the monuments. It's not clear. The subtext, of course, is a horror. The subtext is something that will be a subject for us to talk about tonight and for weeks beyond, which is that this is not how it's supposed to work. And we're getting used to what this has meant and what it will mean. But for the moment, I have to say, Washington has a way of registering its disapproval. And when J.D. Vance went to Union Station and thought that he would be greeted by rapturous crowds, it was a little bit like walking into hostile territory. And I think that was eye-opening. There is a way in which it feels a little bit, to me at least, having worked in Iraq, that the Trump administration operates in Washington a little bit like the Green Zone in Baghdad, where they kind of stay within the palace walls as much as possible. And we know from history that when you reside in the land of Oz and you begin to believe your own mythology and you don't step out and encounter reality, that can lead you into some disastrous choices.
Yes. And since we'll get to China later, but I was struck by the protester who threw the submarine sandwich and the way that the silhouette of that almost became symbolic, like the standing in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, I do think the guy in front of the tank would like a word on that analogy.
Exactly.
But it is true that the sandwich has been immortalized with
Yes.
Banksy-style protests.
Right.
And, you know, I sometimes try to think about what would Gandhi make of this if you'd explained to him that this was the nature of civil disobedience in our day and age. But look, it is a sign of how people are figuring out ways to register their discontent. And I think we're at the beginning of a process. One of the patterns that I look for is the way that citizen power marshals itself. How does it organize itself? It takes time. We sometimes forget that it took 20, 30, 40 years in some cases for great movements to achieve their definition of success. If you're talking about the suffragettes, if you're talking about achieving the first legislation during the Gilded Age to try to bring, in that period, the trusts under control. It took 17 years between the time that Mark Twain named it a Gilded Age and you had the passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act. So my message is, settle in. This is a marathon, not a sprint. As a citizen, this takes attention and it takes persistence. It's not a problem that gets solved overnight.
That's another translation of what Stacey Abrams said the other night.
Oh, is that right?
No, I mean,
yeah.
it was different, but it got to the same place.
I do think that's what history
it was a
tells
measure
us.
of optimism that I think people were looking for in that sense.
Well, I mean, it is, I think we're all at this point in some ways looking for what history can tell us. There's a seductive comfort, which can be misleading too, to say, oh, you know, we've been through this. We've had moments like this before. That means we'll get through it. No, you know, as Robert Putnam likes to say, pendulum happens in history, but you sometimes have to push the pendulum. And I think the message there is that this is a set of values and a set of relationships that often happen face to face. You know, one of the great lessons of the progressive era, how we went from the Gilded Age to a progressive era, was that it took first a change of culture, in effect, a moral awakening of a certain kind, and then it led to civic action, people getting together, meeting in organizations, meeting to have talks and to exchange ideas and to throw out proposals to one another. And then the third step is actually policy. So in a way, the power begins in the hands of people who are interested in seeing an alternative way of living.
When you said the pendulum needs to be pushed, you started your career at the Chicago Tribune in Chicago, and J.B. Pritzker, the governor, will be here tomorrow night. And he's done some pushing, and it seems that had an effect in Chicago. How would you interpret what's happened?
Yeah,
with
it's
Trump
very
and Pritzker?
interesting because part of the Trump strategy is a bit of the old probe. You know, you push until you see if you hit bone. And I think he began to get a sense that Chicago might not be such an easy place to invade.
Because?
You know, Trump always mentions these friends of his, like he's got this guy in Paris named Jim who tells him about things that are happening. I'm always tempted to know if he had a guy in Chicago who called him up and said, this isn't going to work. You're essentially going to organize the city in response to you. I mean, look, I think there is, it matters the sequence. He started in Washington. Washington is, as you know, David, a kind of municipal, it's a very strange political creature. It doesn't have any of the ordinary powers that a city has. Chicago, where I came up starting on the Metro desk, I, wrote a profile in the New Yorker of Mayor Daley, Richard M. Daley, the son of Richard J. Daley, who I, in an immortal phrase, used to refer to the rest of the country as the New Yorks, the LAs, and all that. And Chicago, as you know, has a kind of steel in its spine. And the idea that people were going to come in and tell this city that it was overrun, as Trump would say, by immigrants, by crime. Chicagoans will tell you, we're the only ones who get to criticize Chicago.
Right. That's great. So night after night, the guests from Norm Eisen to Stacey Abrams to Garrett Groff to Eugene Robinson have talked about where we are on the road to perdition, to autocracy. And 2 out of the 4 say we're already there. I've sort of listened to you about this, but I'd be interested in your perspective on how close we are to a total totalitarian state.
Well, I mean, having actually lived in something close to a totalitarian state, China under Xi Jinping, I can give you some points of reference.
Yeah.
I visited North Korea. Look, I think that the reason I don't mean to be jokey about it, is that when we use our level of alarm, we have to be sure that this is the moment that we're mobilizing people for. Meaning that if we actually say that Trump has reached the maximalist position of what he can take, that there is nothing left to be done within democratic politics, then what you're doing is essentially telling people that the democratic system is unavailable to you. It's failed. And that's not actually the point where we are. The point where we are is that we're in the run-up to a midterm election in which we could have some reasonable effect, some ability to contain his powers, some ability at least to begin to make the Congress function again. We could also, let's remember, begin to talk more seriously about how this country could, say, revive the tradition of amending the Constitution. We used to do that on average every 10 years. The last time we really amended the Constitution was 1971. We've lost the tradition. We've lost the memory of our founding system, our founding documents being a malleable document. I'm not suggesting that we're in any political position to begin amending the Constitution, but I think you have to begin to tell people to shift the Overton window, as we used to say a few years ago, an idea that's almost been exhausted, to tell people that politics is still an arena in which we have our best chance of peacefully bringing about the pushing of the pendulum.
You brought it up, amend the Constitution. What would you think, what would that amendment be? What would the first one come to your mind?
Well, I suppose there's a few things that one could imagine. Well, I don't know if it would take an amendment of the Constitution to make D.C. a state, but this is an idea that
that's for sure,
has been rattling around.
Yep.
I'll secretly admit here that there is a fantastic book just coming out right now by my colleague at The New Yorker, Jill Lepore, on the subject of the Constitution and the power of amendment, and relearning the muscle memory of what it means to make this a living, breathing document again. So I commend to you all that book. I'm going to be talking to her in Washington next week.
Great. Yeah, well, Jill Lepore is a national treasure.
She is an absolute national. Yes. And by the way, she somehow, in her spare time, manages to write 700 pages on the history of the Constitution while raising nice children and gardening. And teaching at Harvard.
And teaching, yes. So we're going to get into what's happened the last few days, but I want to set some context for that first. And I think it was 2015, you wrote a piece, The Fearful and the Frustrated, about the alt-right. You sort of saw it coming. Did you know the way that would attach to Trump over the years?
Yeah, that was an experience of the value of going away and coming home. You know, I'm an American. I'm a reporter who had come up here. I'd gone overseas for a decade. And I came back, and as we all remember, Trump announced his candidacy for president in 2015. It happened to be that I was working on a piece at the time that had been inspired by this horrific shooting by Dylan Roof, who was a white supremacist who walked into a Mother Emanuel church and slaughtered parishioners. And that story was about this inchoate group of people who imagine themselves as white nationalists. Who was this group? What was this what was the origins of this crime? So I was working on that piece, and I got a call from my editors at The New Yorker, and they said, Trump has announced that he's running for president, and it was being treated as a great big joke. You remember, because in New York, of course, he's a piece of the kind of permanent media clownish furniture. That's the way that he was regarded. And so it was assumed he'll be out in a few weeks. This is all a publicity stunt. And they said, would you quickly pivot from the white supremacist story and do a profile of Trump, the candidate? And you better move fast because he's probably going to be out in a couple weeks. And I said, okay, so I went out and stopped meeting with these white supremacists and started going to Trump rallies. And I wrote to my editors after about a week of this, I said, this is one story. And we need to merge these two into one story. Because what this is about, it turned out, was a set of ideas that had been hatched, really, I would argue, around the idea of around 9/11 and the beginning of the war in Iraq, the idea of twilight war, the idea that we are beset from enemies. In that case, after 9/11, it was such a shock to our system. The idea that we would be attacked in a way we hadn't been since Pearl Harbor. And then gradually over time, you began to see that they said, okay, it's not just jihadists that were fighting in Afghanistan, it's also jihadists coming over the border. You remember that moment. There was even a congressman long since who's left politics named Tom Tancredo, who, for the power user, that is a name. If you recognize that name, you deserve a door prize. But he made this leap from saying this is not just about fighting for Western values overseas, it's about defending us from the enemies within. And that over time animated the birth of the anti-immigration movement. And Trump, of course, saw that and latched onto it and seized it, not as some authentic issue for him particularly. It was congenial to some of his pre-existing attitudes, but he picked it up, and you had this fusion of these two movements. And it was a piece called The Fearful and the Frustrated, and it was about he had awakened a gene within us that's been in our national soul from the beginning, and it comes and it goes. And he turned it into the politics that we inhabit today.
And that was 2015 when Charlie Kirk was, what, like 20 or something.
Yeah.
But he took that whole, I don't even know if you'd call it ideology, but whatever, the movement in those 10 years.
Yeah, I think that Trump as a phenomenon meant a lot of different things to people in the beginning. I mean, there were some people who thought he is the manifestation of what I don't dare say out loud, but what I feel, which is perhaps this fear of the country changing, particularly for white men. There was also a piece of that caucus who felt like they were actually reenacting some vision of a 1980s era Reagan-style individualist ethic. That's what they thought that they were signing on to. And it was this conglomeration of different ideas. And then over time, as we know, Charlie Kirk started talking about young people. And I was reminded of this today, actually. We were taping the podcast this morning, and Jane Mayer, our friend, who has done a lot of work over the years, she'd interviewed Charlie Kirk, and the thing that had started him down this path was that as in his mind, this is what he would tell people, he thought he could go to West Point, he applied, and in his mind, his seat was taken by a woman, and a woman of color. And he began to tell himself that this was a grand injustice. And he took this idea, and he went out into the world, and he found people who felt that they had been treated unjustly. And he was able to tap into this. In a way, he sort of picked a lock of something that was out there in the world. And it was very, very powerful. And look, the other reason, I don't know if you ever interviewed him, but part of the reason it worked was that he was masterful at code switching. He could figure out who he was talking to at one moment or another. And I think we don't need to, you've been talking about it all week, but we're at a very dangerous moment in this country. We're at a threshold moment. And the idea that the small d democratic method of change, which is that we can get into a room and disagree with one another, perhaps even violently disagree with one another, but do it without taking up arms, that idea is fundamentally imperiled right now. And it has been growing steadily since 2015. And we're at a point where, as a political class in Washington, the people who serve in our name, the only way we know from history, and this is very well documented by the scholars who fight against this, is they have to repeatedly, emphatically, creatively, and authentically renounce violence. They have to say there is no place for this in our politics. There is no place for this in our country. And if they don't do that, then this process builds over time.
And Trump renounces certain violence, but only the violence that suits his political needs.
Yeah, that's where we are right now. That's where we are.
So we will.
So is this the sunny turn in the conversation where we begin to talk about hope and light?
No.
No.
But we're sort of easing into China a little bit more.
Okay.
Karen Templeton.
The authoritarian communist regime.
Well,
Okay, understood.
sort of,
Yeah.
but it gets to, not to Charlie Kirk, but to young people, which was Karen Templeton cited a study or a poll or something the other day that really fascinated me about the sort of the young people's perspectives on autocracy. And that part of why they're less disturbed about it has to do with China and all of the things they get from China, from their cell phones to TikTok.
Yeah, I think there's also a way that they've grown up in a period when they look across the Pacific. And what do they see when they watch the Olympics a couple of years ago or in 2008? They see a place that is growing, that is building, that is putting up skyscrapers, that is laying down railroad track at a pace that was like us at the end of the 19th century. Now, what they don't get, of course, is the other side of the story, which is the people's voices who are silenced as a result of being in an oppressive autocratic regime, of being in essentially of life in a one-party state. So if you look at China from over here, and what you're experiencing is TikTok and inexpensive housewares and the sight of spectacular infrastructure on TV, you can begin to say, it seems like they're doing what we used to do, only bigger and better. But I think there's something else going on. And I actually think this begins to get to why inequality is a piece of the puzzle, is that I think what young people who are attracted to the seductive idea of a strong man, what they're really responding to, it's almost like a kind of referred pain. It's not exactly that strongman rule is so attractive. It's that they're looking at the present conditions in our politics and they're saying, this system is not in any way reflecting the needs and the plaintive cries of people out in the country who are saying, what happened to the promise of what the mythology of this country is, which is, after all, that you can, let's say, out-earn your parents. If you were born in 1940, you stood a 90% chance of out-earning your parents. Young people today stand less than half that chance. There are a lot of young people out there who say, if only we had a CEO. Now, it is in my view, a radical misjudgment of how you actually achieve meaningful, productive political reform, but it is an expression of, in a way, a kind of politics of despair.
That's true. And this might not be true of the last few months, but in my experience of reporting, I've always found that the people who are most optimistic about America are the ones who have the least reason to be. Black women, Hispanics, and it's, I don't know.
And immigrants.
And immigrants.
I mean,
yeah.
I think to myself, look, I am. You're kind of mentioned my dad at the outset of this conversation.
Yeah.
He came to this country as a refugee. He was a Polish Jewish family that they left Poland. They went on this odyssey, as so many families did, families here, I'm sure. He was eventually born in India, of all places. My dad's birth certificate says caste Polish. True story. And he was given
Where
the
did that
middle
fit
name.
in the caste system?
Well, no, he's out. They kicked him right out of India. That's where you were on the caste system if you were Polish. And his parents had lost everything. My grandfather was one of 7 siblings. He was the only one to survive the war. Wow. My father was given the middle name Winston after Winston Churchill because of just the idea that in word, you will put the idea of vanquishing fascism on a page, on a birth certificate, right there next to caste Polish. And they came to this country, and as you know, he says, I started here in this country in a basket. And the people who come here, who fight, and we know, all of us know people who have fought incredibly hard to get here. Those are the people who still believe in the American idea. And I know Chinese immigrants, for instance, who have trekked from China through the Darien Gap, all the way up through Central America to get to the southern border with the United States because they want to get out of the Chinese system. So when we look across the Pacific and we say, God, it is nice how they're able to generate, build the new airports. Let's remember that actually what we're fighting for here, it's a word I don't use as much anymore because I think it's layered. But
what, fighting?
Yeah, I've become a little bit more self-editing about the language of the language of combat. I'm not sure it's necessarily the kind of language that is on my mind right now. I'm thinking more about the language of putting a shoulder to the wheel. You know, people sometimes ask these days, what gives you hope? And I keep thinking to myself, I don't say it very often, but I think that's the wrong word. I use a different 4-letter word. It's a family-friendly word, but it's work. It's work, honestly. It's the idea of actually getting together with people who are concerned, getting together with people who believe that there is something to be done. And there's nothing wrong with saying we're going to fight. But
work is right. I mean, Marty Barron, my editor at the Post, he'd say we're not at war, we're at work. Different variation of that same thing.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. I want to have an aside here. Evan was talking about his father, Peter. One among many notable things of Peter Osnos was that he was the publisher of Barack Obama before anyone knew it was Barack Obama. He published Dreams from My Father, its first edition, I don't know what it sold, but...
It's sold in the high 2 figures, I think. And they got that book because Obama had signed with a bigger publisher and he'd gotten an advance and then he'd missed his deadline, the bane of every author. And so the book was basically put back out on the market like a tired old, mule or something. And somebody will pick up. And at that point, he wasn't yet Barack Obama. And so, but to my dad's credit, he bought this book. And I remember him saying, well, I've never said this, but I remember him saying at home, I think this guy could be president of the United States.
Yeah, I encountered many people who said that, but
I think if you read the humanism and the Americanness of that story, in all of its complexity and its flaws and its rupture and its repair, in all of those elements, its candor, it's all of that, you said to yourself, that's sort of what we aspire to be. And that, in the end, it was kind of I think about this as an author, and that having a literate president is a powerful tool.
Yeah, they're few and far between, but there's some good ones there. I'm going to go back to China a little bit just to get to know you a little better. Did you know Chinese before you went there? When did you learn it? It's a very difficult language. You must be great at linguistic.
Well, I started in college. I got the bug as a college freshman.
Really?
It was a great professor who had a whole class on Tiananmen Square and the uprising at Tiananmen Square in 1989. And he was a kind of Oxford Don type. He was teaching here in the US, but he said it was a wonderful approach. He said, if you want to understand what happened on a single night, June 3rd in Beijing in 1989, we have to go back 1,000 years. And it was such a seductive way to teach, because he said, and if you really want to understand it, you should probably learn the language. And that was the beginning of a process. And I started studying it as a college freshman, and it became in some ways the guiding line of my life. I met my wife in China. She's an American. We happened to meet over in Beijing. And the only reason she would call me back is because there weren't very many Americans over there.
And you got there in 2005. And what's your name in Chinese? I saw
Evan. Evan.
Evan.
Yeah. My last name is essentially means European, which is a generous way of just saying big nose. Is kind of, they gave me that. And then Evan.
Yeah. And what was the daily life like there for you?
It was a golden age of journalism, of foreign correspondence in China. And I say that because it was this period when you remember, China had embarked on this grand experiment in 1979, which Deng Xiaoping said, we're going to emancipate our minds. That was the quote. And what they meant was, of course, not give up political power, but try to create as much space in society where you could live a life without giving up the monopoly on force and power that the Communist Party had. And so what that meant was they said, we're going to allow foreign correspondents to come in. And so I came in as one of these foreign correspondents. They'd started doing it in the late 70s, early 80s. And you could travel all over the country. I had these kind of magnificent experiences. Like for a month, I decided to just walk in Sichuan province and kind of see what would happen. And the cops would come pretty much every day. And they would say, I just love the image of what they were getting some calls from somebody. People would say, there seems to be some lunatic Westerner walking in town. Can you come check him out? And they would come, but you could work. I did at one point a story where I said I wanted to understand what it felt like to be Chinese going out into the world for the first time. And so I joined a Chinese bus tour of Europe. It was 30...
Better than a Japanese tour, I guess.
Yeah, I wouldn't have understood a word on the Japanese bus tour. But it was 39 Chinese tourists and me. And most of them had never been out of Asia before. It was all kinds of small-town folks. And we covered 5 countries in 10 days. We were moving fast. And I can tell you, we went to Marx's birthplace, little-known place, not a place many of you have been, perhaps, in Germany. But we were only there for 11 minutes because we wanted to get to Paris in time for Louis Vuitton before it closed. So we had
perfect.
Competing impulses. And I will say that the reason I call it a golden age for foreign correspondence was I was able to live in a little house in the middle of town in a very Chinese neighborhood. You didn't have to live anymore in these old compounds where they had already installed the bugs into every light fixture. They were really bothered that they had to come and install new listening devices in my little house. But it was right before the advent of a new piece of technology, of a whole new world of technology. Things like cell phones that everybody had with them, that they could monitor your text messages, that they could see where you were at any moment. We was just at the tail end, in effect, of the analog era. And so you were able to go everywhere. I would leave my cell phone at home so that if they were monitoring my cell phone, they would think, this lazy guy is just at home another day. And I could go out to all kinds of places in the country. Today, that is simply not possible. I was there most recently reporting in 2023 for The New Yorker, and it is very, very hard now because you worry about the effect on your sources, because people who agree to talk with you, you have to be thinking foremost about what's going to happen after I walk out the door. You don't worry as much about yourself, but what will the police and the state do? And so it's become incredibly difficult to do a lot of work on the ground now. My hat is off to the correspondents who are based there, who are figuring it out, because it is almost like, it's a little bit like a...
But there aren't that many.
There's very few. Yeah. There's very few. And you are actually quite literally, in some cases, aware of the fact. I had this experience in recent years of reporting there, where you contact somebody about an interview, and then they get a phone call from the state security saying you shouldn't go to that interview. And even if that person is very brave and says, I want to do this, you as a reporter, you have there's a level of almost informed consent you need from that person. You say to yourself, do they really know the full implications of talking to me? Because if they talk to me and that story is instantly available everywhere around the world, what will happen to them? So it's made it a lot more complicated. And as a result, we know a lot less about what's happening.
Yes. But that's another reminder that for whatever's going on here, we're not there yet.
You're absolutely right. And I think that's an important point to mention. I mean, I think that in the press these days we have an allergy to being pushed around. That's kind of how people who go into this business are a little bit ornery by disposition. I think you would agree with that, right?
My wife might.
Yeah. She's been doing a longitudinal study for some decades. And we're now in a position where we're being called every day by this government the enemy of the state, or whatever the latest version of that is. And I think that people are using the muscles that they have in all the right ways right now.
So let's turn now to Have Yachts, which is one of my favorite titles of all time. I'm hesitant to ask you this, but how did that title come about?
I was working on this topic, and I heard that expression in the UK.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I thought, boy, that is a wonderful little bit of language. And I said, I wonder if there's ever been a book by that title. And there hadn't been. And I said, I really need to do this as and you'll appreciate this, being both a reporter and an editor at various points. Editors are convinced that writers never know how to title their own pieces. I just want you to know.
Yes.
It's true. And so I submitted this title as the title of a piece in the New Yorker, and my editor said, I don't know. It seems, I don't know. And I said, no, I'm going to die on this hill. Like, this is the hill. I'm going out on this one. And so they said, no, let the guy have his title.
The only times that the publishers won on a title are the ones I regret.
Right. Well, that's true.
Yeah. So good for you to get it there.
Think you gotta
but
dig
I
in
also
your
want to
heels.
say, I've read this book twice, and the first time I turned into a socialist, and the next time I turned into something even more to the left. I mean, you can't read this book and not just react. And I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean. So let's go through some of that and start actually with what's in the title, the culture of yachts.
Yeah.
First, you go down to Florida and describe sort of it's a fascinating and disgusting subculture.
Well, I got this. It was actually the idea of my editor, David Remnick at the New Yorker, who said, and this is the best kind of story, is a story that can be suggested with just a single word. He said, what's the deal with these yachts? I said,
Right.
Say no more. I'll be reachable in 6 months in Italy, I assume. But I had a real puzzle, which is, I said, I don't really know the first thing about these things. And this is where, being a correspondent, your training is basically you just go. Mm-hmm. You just go. And you start chatting with people. And I went down to the Palm Beach International Boat Show. First I looked in my closet and I said, do I have anything that would be plausibly recognizable as a yacht
come
outfit?
on, this guy.
Well, to be
grew up
perfectly
in
honest,
Greenwich.
I got down there and somebody asked me for directions. I was like, well, all right. Guilty. But what you quickly discover, and the reason why this became of interest to somebody who covers politics and foreign affairs, is that these objects, these machines, are, in a way, they are floating symbols of so much of what we've been talking about in this conversation, about politics and about economics. I mean, just as a practical matter, the biggest yachts in the world will cost you about the better part of $1 billion. They're as long as a football field, as long as a city block. They are, in fact, the most expensive objects that the human species has ever figured out how to own. More expensive than any real estate we've bought or sold in this country. More expensive even than the most valuable work of art, which was Salvator Mundi by Leonardo, which not incidentally now hangs on the wall of a yacht owned by the Saudi crown prince.
Wow.
So there, we're all socialists now. I think. But yeah, the truth is that I just decided these objects. Look, there is a great tradition of a kind of writing at the New Yorker that appeals to me, which John McPhee in the 1960s wrote a magnificent book about frozen orange juice. And the reason it was frozen orange juice that he wrote about was this was a new thing in the United States of America, that you could wake up on a January morning in Madison, Wisconsin, and have a spectacular glass of sunshine in a bottle. And it was partly because we developed the technology during World War II that we used for processing blood plasma, and were able to apply it then to processing frozen orange juice. And it also tapped into all of the new marketing power and the new ideas we had about publicity or propaganda and this kind of ascendant moment of American optimism. And he said, I'm just writing a book about orange juice.
Yeah, oranges.
Oranges. And in a way, I said, I'm just writing a book about boats. But you can, within that, begin to tell a story about how some of the most powerful people in our society imagine their responsibilities, their opportunities, their luxuries, and ultimately, in some cases, their seclusion.
I was fascinated by the caste system within that elite group. You know, you're in Florida, you're at what you think are the mega yachts, and then what happens?
Yeah, I was sitting there slack-jawed, standing in front of this enormous yacht, thinking, wow, I have gotten to the belly of the beast. And a guy taps me on the shoulder, one of the attendants, and he says, if you want to see the really big hardware, you got to go down to the other marina. And so I went down to see, I made a date to go meet some of the brokers who were buying and selling these. And I will tell you, if this hasn't touched your life personally, you may not know that we are living through the golden age of super yachts in the world. There has frankly never been as many of these things, or as big as they are, selling for the prices they are. And I went to see a broker who I was later trying to describe his mood, and I decided to describe him in the book as exhibiting an almost post-coital level of satisfaction. He had sold one yacht the day before, he was selling one that particular evening, and he was levitating into a kind of blissful stratosphere that I said, I'm going to need to try to contain this for the purposes of getting it on the page. But these objects, these machines, are, as you say, part of a caste system. And one of the things that's always the goal, if you're a writer, if you're trying to get inside a nonfiction world of some kind, is not to look at it from the outside like, you know, me, and just saying, gee whiz, these things are awfully big, but to try to get in and say, what does it feel like to be one of these owners?
Yeah, well, you almost did.
Well, I had this experience.
In Monte Carlo, right?
I had a moment. I had a moment. I went to Monaco, and by the way, hazard pay was not forthcoming here. I've been asking about it ever since. But so I'm at the Royal Yacht Club of Monaco, and I check into my room there at the yacht club, and the yacht club is styled like a giant yacht. And I realized in that instant that I would never be fully satisfied anywhere else again. And the next morning, I'm out on my terrace, and I look down, and I see a guy on a yacht. And I was there, I was eating an omelet, and I had this glass of like preternaturally fresh orange juice. An ode to McPhee, I guess. I didn't even know it. And I'm looking at this guy down on this kind of mid-tier yacht, and he's looking up at me on my perfect terrace. And there he was juiceless. And I had this feeling that just started somewhere in my chest. It was a strange sensation, and it kind of worked its way out. And I realized this is what superiority feels like. There was a moment that really brought this home for me. The owner of one of the world's fanciest yachts told a guest, one of his friends, who told me that this owner had said to him in the end, why do I have this thing? He said, because, he said, you and I both fly on private jets, he said to his friend, the guest. You and I both have chefs. He said, so the only way I can tell the world that I am in a different effing category than you is the boat. And I thought when I heard that, I said, that really does capture the heart of this matter, which is about a kind of insatiability, a sort of hole within that people are trying to fill. And I think all of us now can look out into our public culture in this country at this moment. I don't need to name any names, but just maybe a few people whose names rhyme with Elon Musk. And imagine why it is that a person does why do they keep acquiring? Why do they keep exerting their control or their ability to shape the world in the way they do? And on some level, it is about insatiability.
So since you visited Marx's birthplace for 11 minutes, are these the excesses of capitalism or the inevitable ends of capitalism?
I think that we have lived through moments in our history that rhyme with this. Sometimes people will say, well, the Gilded Age was pretty bad. We had, and this is true, that during the Gilded Age, there were parties in New York City in the 1890s where people would arrive at a ballroom and be shown their way to a horse, and they would get on the horse and eat dinner in black tie on a horse with champagne in the saddlebags, just because they could. There was another party, a memorable one, that made the papers, where people arrived and were given a little golden trowel and were told to go and dig rubies and gems out of a giant pile of sand, and they could take home what they wanted. Now, that process, had it been allowed to continue, had that period in American life continued, there was a pretty deep belief, a growing belief among a lot of Americans that this country was cooked, that there was no way that you could continue on that way. You had vast inequality. You had life expectancy among the working poor that was declining. You had acts of abuse in mines out in Colorado, out in West Virginia. You had examples of grotesque abuses in the slaughterhouses in Chicago, and on and on and on. And there was a kind of awakening among some people that this can't go on. And it sounds perverse perhaps, but it was Teddy Roosevelt and later Franklin Roosevelt who believed that in order to save capitalism, that what you had to do was rein it in from its most egregious excesses and abuses. I think it's worth saying, look, we're at a moment right now where the United States is capable of producing enormous wealth and capital, enormous opportunity through technology in many cases. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to settle in the hands of a group so small that half of all American adults will tell you that they don't have $1,000 to spend in the event of an emergency expense. That is not how you build a country that is a muscular, thriving, stable, admirable model for the rest of the world. That's how you build a society that is something closer to oligarchy.
So I guess we're waiting for our next Teddy Roosevelt or FDR.
It's not as crazy as it sounds. Here's why. What did Teddy Roosevelt, what did he represent? Here was a guy who was a privileged son of the country.
Well, they both were.
They both were. They came out of tremendous advantage. Mm-hmm. Teddy Roosevelt had also lived a life. He'd gone around the country. He had been a Rough Rider. He'd had real jobs. He'd done things. He contained multitudes, to borrow the expression. And so when he came back and he said, look, all I'm saying is that we owe people a square deal, which is essentially the offer that he was making to people. they took him seriously on that idea. And they said, in a way, maybe he has some credibility because he's coming from the top of society. Why would a man with so many advantages bother to meddle in this question? I mean, later, of course, FDR was, as he said, proud to be a traitor to his class. I'm not saying that we need to rely or wait on the most powerful people in society to decide that they're going to give up some of that privilege in order to make changes. But they are a part of the process. Right now, you see in clear, unambiguous terms in New York City, the choice of Mamdani as a candidate, his success in that race, is a blaring alarm about affordability in this country, about people who say, this is not the bargain I was promised in this country. And we do know from history that there are people who are at the top who begin to say, this doesn't work. I mean, already, curiously enough, I quote some in the book, people who are, the titans of the hedge fund industry, guys like Paul Tudor Jones, who say, look, if you look back historically, inequality of this scale only ends with war or revolution or, his particular concern, very high taxes.
But clearly, clearly that little cabal of Manhattan landlords and developers doesn't feel that way. They're trying to defeat Mamdani.
I think that's right.
And it's backfiring, I think.
It totally is. Yeah. They're discovering that there's no market for what they're pushing as an alternative. It's an amazing statistic to me, David. I've spent a fair bit of time over the years reporting from West Virginia. It was where I worked. My first job out of college was at a little paper called the Clarksburg Exponent Telegram. I was a photographer there. I was a very bad photographer.
How did you end up there?
It was my first job. It was where I got a job. I sent out applications to a bunch of places.
Had you ever heard of it?
I hadn't until I applied, but I expressed rapturous affection. And most importantly, they said, yeah, we'll give you a job, $230 a week. And so I came down, and one of the things that is very notable to me is West Virginia we think of now in shorthand in journalism as Trump country, right? Like the reddest place you can go. But in the 2016 Democratic primary, Bernie Sanders won all 55 counties of West Virginia. An amazing fact. And when he became unavailable as a candidate, and in fact, the data suggests that in a one-on-one contest, he would have beaten Trump. I mention it to say there are people all over the country who, if given the right opportunity, the right kind of candidate, the right combination of qualities, which we can't always predict in advance, they might be responsive in a way that would surprise us.
Another book that you wrote has to do with Joe Biden. And I'm curious about your perspective about Biden going in, coming out of the book, and then what happened after that with him.
Yeah, I got interested in Joe Biden, strangely, through the side door back in 2014 when I first moved back to the United States. I'd come back, I'd moved to Washington, David, and I didn't know anything, I didn't know anybody. And all I knew was foreign policy. I knew foreign affairs. And I knew that Joe Biden was working on a whole lot of foreign affairs. He would get a lot of, as he would sometimes say, I go to the places that Obama doesn't want to go. So he was in charge of a whole lot of tough patches, places like Iraq and things like that. And so look, Biden in Washington was a little bit of kind of, again, a piece of, people had sort of stopped noticing he was there. He was in the most maligned office in the land, the vice presidency. But I said, oh, maybe I can get an interview. So I called up. I said, I'd like to request an interview with Vice President Biden. And they said, sure, yeah, how about tomorrow? And I said, oh, okay, I guess we can. And what I discovered was that, as you already knew, the man could talk. And he would talk and talk and talk. And you watch the faces of his PR people, and they would just be ashen because he would say things, like, I shouldn't be telling you this, which is the sweetest expression a reporter has ever heard. And so I'd go back, and I'd go back, and I'd go back, and I'd go back. And I'll tell you the reason why in that period in 2014, when I started writing about it. I wrote a profile of him in the New Yorker. Essentially, what seemed like the end of his political career was a kind of swan song story about this guy who'd been in public life all these years, never really grasped the brass ring and that kind of thing. What was interesting to me was that he had lived a real life. He had lost terrible things. He had lost his, as we all know, he had lost his wife and his daughter. He had bombed out of the presidency for plagiarism in 1987. Didn't even make it to 88. We sometimes say the 88 race, but he was out even before then. He then had 2 aneurysms right afterwards. They said, you might not ever speak again. That's what the doctors told him. He was read his last, and by the way, when they told him that, it was after the plagiarism scandal, and he said, you know, that could have helped me actually a few months ago. So all of this stuff had happened. And the reason why it was interesting to me is Washington is a place where usually people have led lives. The reason they got there is because they had the Rhodes Scholarship, and then they cruised into Washington and started measuring the drapes. So they haven't lived all that much life. Joe Biden he had a sort of silver medalist's mindset. Like, he was constantly aggrieved. He had a chip on his shoulder, and that was this engine that powered him. And eventually, through the strangest turn of events, in 2016, of course, he didn't really get the nod from Obama. Obama supported Hillary, and at that point, Biden had lost his son, Beau, a kind of one more piece in this puzzle of loss. And when he ran in 2020, it was almost like his life was this strange, perfect opposite of Donald Trump's life. Donald Trump had started life with, as you'll recall, as he said, a small loan of $100 million from his father, and words to that effect, and had lived this life of gilded opportunity, and had declared bankruptcy over and over again. All that's to say, and Biden, just by being a decent guy, was in his own way kind of an alternative. Already in 2020, there was concern about his age. It was clear at that point he would be the oldest president we'd ever had. And he made, and we all remember this, he made a promise, in effect. He said, I will be a bridge. I'll be a transition candidate. And, he tried to kind of weasel out of it a little bit. People would say, are you saying you're only going to run for one term? And he'd say, no, I'm not saying that, but I'll be a bridge. And everybody interpreted it for what he was hoping they would take him to mean. And I think, in a way, what happened in that story is that he lost sight of that promise, and he broke that promise to Americans on a level that offended them more than he understood. He thought, well, they're going to reward me for my performance. They're not going to want to usher me out, particularly when the alternative is this guy who I drove out of the White House. And he didn't understand that his very presence, he himself, aging so visibly and in violation of the compact that he had made with the public, became essentially ineligible for the presidency. And he never grasped it. And the more that the data, the more that the evidence became clear that he would not win, the more he dug in, and that old chip on his shoulder became a diabolical problem and became, in a way, a blinding effect. And he and his people around him blinded themselves to the reality of what they were facing.
You're listening to WAUK Jackson, Milwaukee, WMDX Columbus, Madison, WCFW HD2 W228EP Chippewa Falls, WFHR Wisconsin Rapids, WLAK Amory, and WLCX La Crosse, a part of the Civic Media Radio Network.
We saw him every day on TV. He had this very clotted voice. He was kind of weakening. That was quite obvious. We all saw that. I remember mentioning in the article that he had these cards that he was using, and it was, it was prompting him. It was not particularly strange. He was using it to reel off quotes from Trump that Trump had said, odious things and so on. But what struck me most of all, David, was that he was defiant. He was completely defiant. No matter how many times I asked the question of, but what about the fact that people expected you to run? Or asked the question of, but what about the fact that the polls show today that you are trailing in a way that you never were in 2020? His answer was always the same, which is, I'm the only one who's beaten him. And it was a kind of, he'd become convinced that there was something special about his moment. I think January 6th had a transformative effect on his imagination of the presidency. That watching this assault, not only on democracy, but on the building where he really felt at home in his life. He was always a creature of the Senate. That he felt by the time he got there, 14 days later, literally 2 weeks standing on those steps, that he felt as if it was almost like a calling. And it was a tragic and really a calamitous misunderstanding of his mandate, of what the country asked of him and what the country wanted of him. And what saddens me as a person who found so much decency and humanity in his life before that was that he marred his legacy, he marred his record by staying too long and making that catastrophic decision to run and to stay after the world was telling him the time has passed.
That turned into a sort of a tragedy.
Absolutely a tragedy. It is a tragedy, and it is like so much in his life. It is it's been a life of improbable success and almost incomprehensible, staggering losses, and some that fate visited upon him and some that he created himself. He's, I think that over time, as we have with some other one-term presidents like George H.W. Bush or Jimmy Carter, where we will look back on the things they did and begin to say that maybe they were laying in elements of our future that weren't recognized at the time. That's certainly the case with Biden's infrastructure investments, drug prices, climate to the degree it hasn't been unwound under Trump. But that can't compensate for, it doesn't erase what was, in the end, a violation of what he set out to do, which was to save us from a second Trump term. And that anybody who pays attention to politics and pays attention to the mind and the psychology, as you have, of politicians, has to find that fascinating.
So I know that I'm asking you to mind read, but does he understand that now, do you think, or do you think he's rationalizing it today?
I don't think he understands that. I'm not sure he'll ever come to terms with it. I think that he became... Look, the presidency is a bizarre thing to want. And you've written about this. At the core of when you write about presidents, the question we're always trying to ask is, what makes this person get up out of bed in the morning and think, not only I can be, but I should be the president? Yes. I mean, that is, if it wasn't slightly glamorous, it would be pathological.
I think it still is.
I think it may be both in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And in Joe Biden's case, he had, the guiding mantra of his life had been that when the world pushes against you, that you push back harder, and you are a walking icon of resilience. The problem is that there are moments when the right answer, the answer for yourself, for your legacy, and for the country, God knows, is to say, actually, I've run my race and it's over. Yeah. And he missed that cue. In a way, he almost became, I'm afraid to say, he became persuaded of a simplified mythology of his own life that wasn't as complex and real as the actuality was.
Since I want all these people to go out and buy your latest book, I will go back to that for one more story, which is the Florida story. I don't know if this is a crowd that might not even know who Florida is.
Oh, but yeah, I will say this one will stay with me forever. Yes. I wanted to write about the phenomenon as part of the Haves and Have Yachts books. As part of that book, I wanted to write about the phenomenon of pop stars doing private gigs for people at home, or because it used to be if you were the wealthiest guy in town, you would buy front row seats at the arena, or maybe you would get you'd get a skybox. And now, as a drummer said to me when I was interviewing about this experience, he said, it used to be that nobody could afford to have the Foo Fighters in their backyard on a Thursday, but now you can. And so I faced this reporting puzzle, which is nobody wanted to talk about it. The artists didn't want to talk about it because it was kind of embarrassing to be doing these money gigs. The clients didn't want to talk about it because they didn't want to showcase how much they were spending. So I started calling artist after artist, and I was getting a whole lot of no's. And then I was talking to an agent. He said, I think there's somebody who might say yes. He said, do you know Flo Rida? And Flo Rida, not the target audience, I think. Flo Rida, I'll tell his people that this may not be the hall for him, but Flo Rida is a hip-hop star from the state of Florida, sings about, apple-bottom jeans and the boots with the fur. Some of the younger people here will know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So I called up Flo Rida, who does a lot of these events, and I said, could I report on this? Could I come along? And he said, yeah. Why don't you come along? And so I ended up embedding with Flo Rida for a bar mitzvah in Chicago. And I tell the story in the book,
Not
but I can
quite
just tell
like
you,
Iraq, but
it was embedment, it was, but it really was. I really did come home and I called my wife and I just said, I think I can die happy as a journalist. I've done all I can ever want to do.
So I'd like to close with honoring our fathers. I do this event because of my
Absolutely.
dad and
I
the
do.
Cap Times, and I know you came up in a journalism family as well. Tell me about the lessons you learned from Peter Osnos and your family.
I guess what I learned from my dear dad is that we live in this place, this country, that has this tradition of a free press, which is an astonishing right. I grew up with the idea that being a reporter is just about the greatest job you can have in the world, because it is a passport to go anywhere. You can find yourself sitting on that ridiculous terrace in Monaco, or you can find yourself trying to blend in with Flo Rida's entourage in Chicago. Or, frankly, at moments of much greater significance, you can find yourself sitting across from a president in the Oval Office, asking yourself, is he making a catastrophic choice? And what will happen to this country? It feels often, I think, like a tremendous weight, because you say to yourself, my God, I've got to get this right. But having lived in places where people don't have the luxury, they don't have the chance in China or in places like Iraq to go out and ask people in positions of power and privilege to explain themselves, it feels to me like the greatest gift, and I'm just grateful to have the chance to do it every day.
And by God, you do get it right. Thank you, Evan, so much.
Thank you, David.
You're listening to Civic Media's coverage of the Cap Times 2025 Idea Fest. We'll be back with more right after this.
The Todd Albaugh Show.
I didn't know what the hell Malort was, so here now, our own Carol, head of traffic, she's brought in Malort down the hatch. Cheers. To Malort. Now, it went down fairly smooth, but the back end is ridiculously terrible. Judas Priest, that's terrible. Once is enough for me. Kind of like my time with women.
The Todd Albaugh Show. Weekdays 2 to 4 on your local Civic Media radio station and on the app.
On your entertainment beat, I'm Pete Schwaba. When not trying to push her bathwater soap on lonely men or selling her good jeans, Sid Sweeney does a little acting. The Sidster will play a boxer in the upcoming film Christy, based on the real life of boxer Christy Martin. Born in small-town West Virginia, Christy Martin realized at a young age she was a good puncher and capitalized on that skill to become the best female boxer of the 90s. Despite not being released yet, the film has had a few eyes on it and is currently pulling a 61% on Rotten Tomatoes. Actor Joel Kinnaman is not a household name, but he has a solid fan base, and he seems perfect for a good crime story. So it's no surprise he is the choice to play the lead role in a new crime drama called Bishop. According to Deadline, Kinnaman plays Bishop Graves, a weathered, experienced detective who chases a killer preying on San Francisco's elite, only to find out that the crimes have a connection to his own father. The series is currently in development at Amazon MGM. For more showbiz fun, tune into Nightlight with me, Pete Schwaba, weeknights from 6 to 8 p.m. on the Civic Media Radio Network.
When it comes to vaping, the truth can get clouded. So let's make it clear. vaping is not safe for youth.
Because vaping can put microscopic particles into your lungs.
And dangerous things like metals into your body.
And nicotine, which can harm a person's brain development through their mid-20s.
With appealing flavors, high nicotine levels, and lots of promotion on social media.
Many kids think vaping is harmless, but it's not.
So talk to your kids about the risks of vaping.
Because when you talk, they hear you.
Learn more at underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
This is Robert Pilot, host of Native Roots Radio. On our show, we talk about Native issues like treaties, protecting Mother Earth, and holding our elected officials accountable. You'll also hear from Turtle Island voices like Arvina Martin, State Representative Heather Keeler, Ruth Anna Buffalo, Dr. Anthony Stately, State Senator Mary Kunish, Robert Lilligren, and Bob Blake. Native issues are human issues, and human issues are Native issues.
Native Roots Radio, weeknights at 8 on your local civic media radio station.
The Maggie Dawn Show.
James Santel joining me. Donald Trump just flat out threatening Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook.
A lot of people apparently, Maggie, in high places in government engaging in mortgage fraud, including Adam Schiff and Letitia James, and now Commissioner Cook as well. The Federal Reserve is created independent of politics, preventing exactly this kind of thing from happening. This is the instability that causes economic crisis.
The award-winning Maggie Dawn Show. Weekday afternoons from 4 until 6.
And good evening, everyone, at the Civic Media World Headquarters in Madison, Wisconsin on a beautiful September evening. I'm Todd Albaugh, joined by producer-engineer Aaron Zommers at 16 minutes now past the hour of 7 o'clock as Civic Media's ongoing coverage of the Cap Times Idea Fest 2025 continues here. Just got done with a fascinating presentation and discussion with Evan Osnos, the panelist there, along with David Maraniss? Maraniss. Thank you very much, Zommers. Maraniss there was the moderator. And I thought it was just a fascinating discussion, and we're going to continue here at the bottom of the hour or shortly thereafter with another discussion with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as the panelist, and John Nichols, the great John Nichols, Capital Times author and independent journalist himself, is going to be here. This is all coming to us just down the street on the other end of State Street at Shannon Hall at the University of Wisconsin Memorial Union live, and they're setting things up here for Governor Tim Walz. And we're also going to take a few minutes to listen to some of the other Ideas Fest activities this week, which continues, and more of it continues over the weekend. We're going to preview that. But right now, I want to bring on via phone from Memorial Union Hall at the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus, the site of this evening's speakers for Idea Fest 2025, the political editor for Civic Media and the founder of the Recombobulation Area, the one, the only Dan Schaefer. Dan, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Todd.
It's always a pleasure. Were you in the room for part of the Evan Osnos presentation?
I sure was, and I thought it was a fascinating conversation. Touched on so much that we talk about all the time on your show and across the Civic Media Network and at the Recombobulation Area, talking about issues of inequality, talking about the politics of the day, talking about Donald Trump. I thought he had some fascinating insights into Joe Biden there right at the end of the discussion as well, and yeah, just a really compelling conversation. And glad we're able to carry it here on Civic Media.
I couldn't agree with you more that I know the title of the discussion was the Have and the Have Yachts. Catchy title, by the way. Apparently has a...
I do like a good pun.
Right?
I like a good pun.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought the best part of the entire evening in terms of his discussion was this insight as someone who had followed Joe Biden for many years and could offer that unique insight into Biden towards the end of his political career, and also just this traveling around as well. So I was glad it went off on a tangent, as we say around here.
Yeah, that's right. It was a good tangent too. I think that's why the conversation format really was great for this type of event. Instead of just having, somebody give up and deliver a, keynote style speech or something like that. I think the conversation format really allowed for things to go in a variety of different directions. And I don't know if that Joe Biden segment really planned or anything like that. But he talked about, coming back from working over in China for quite some time, and then coming back to the United States in 2014 and having a really easy time getting an interview with the vice president. Right. And then a decade later, having another interview with Joe Biden when he was, as he kind of characterized, as Osnos characterized, breaking his promise in a lot of ways to run for a second term, and the decisions and kind of like all of the different machinations and influences that fuel those types of decisions. I thought it was just absolutely fascinating.
That's part of what IdeaFest, Cap Times, IdeaFest 2025 is about, bringing folks here within Madison and different locations throughout the week. Different folks, different voices from around the country. I think it's just a great idea. It continues tomorrow, by the way, here in Madison. Dane County Executive Melissa Agard and Madison Mayor Sachi Rhodes Conway will be talking with John Nichols about Madison in this political era. Also in the afternoon, in the afternoon as well, Ben Wickler, former Wisconsin Democratic Party chairman, is going to be giving a talk as well. The rise of Christian nationalism is going to be on the docket tomorrow, particularly pertinent, timely indeed, as Mike Lucas would say, given the events of the Charlie Kirk assassination. And Dan and you and I talked about it on our show earlier this afternoon. It appears, as more information comes out, that this alleged assassin against Charlie Kirk may have been radicalized by the right online, and part of this thing they call the Groypers, which is the something that a lot of people, as you said earlier today, think of MAGA as being right. Well, it may disturb people to know there's even a more far right. So probably couldn't be a more timely discussion of the rise of Christian nationalism, Dan.
Yeah, it's an important conversation. It's one that I think is, a little bit has been flying under the radar in certain ways. And I think it's good to have a forum to discuss these types of issues. And I think it'll be a good conversation. It sounds like, the way that this has embedded itself in our politics, and it's just kind of intersection of religion and politics in so many ways. I think, now's certainly the right time to be having these types of conversations.
The star of the show in terms of IdeaFest tomorrow ends up back where you're at tonight in Shannon Hall at Memorial Union on campus. It's a one-on-one with Illinois Governor Democrat J.B. Pritzker. And now we're seeing again, ripped right out of the headlines of the day, that in part, Dan, it appears that part of Governor Pritzker's kind of standing up to Donald Trump and the Trump administration, trying to come into Chicago with more ICE agents and possibly, keyword possibly, National Guard. That has deterred Trump. As we hear now, he's moving his attention to Memphis, Tennessee. So be interesting to see what Governor Pritzker says on that tomorrow.
Yeah, and on a host of issues, I think Pritzker has become a pretty prominent national figure, and we've got a great week of hearing from some Midwestern governors. Tony Evers obviously spoke the other night. Tim Walz speaking minutes away here, and J.B. Pritzker. So we've got most of the NFC North covered here, don't we?
We absolutely do. Now, if only we get the different quarterbacks in. I mean, that'd be even better. You're listening to continuing civic media coverage of Cap Times IdeaFest 2025, live from the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus here in Madison. I'm joined by political editor for Civic Media, founder of the Recombobulation Area, Dan Schaefer, over the phone. Dan, speaking of sports, earlier, one of the cool things about IdeaFest, it's not just all politics. And Mike Lucas and Tom Oates, great sports reporters here in the Madison area, they have a podcast, Oates and Lucas, or Lucas and Oates, with the Cap Times. And I was there at their IdeaFest presentation earlier this week. I want to take a clip. They sat down and talked with former men's hockey coach, Badger hockey coach, Tony Granato. And it wasn't just sports. So I want to pick it up here in the program where they're talking to Coach Granato about something that has touched both Coach Granato and Mike Lucas, the subject that touches far too many people, and that's cancer.
Tony's involved in a project, a docu-series titled Fight for Life. Can you explain what path you've gone down with this?
Sure. This started about a year and a half ago. I had three buddies that were kind of, I don't want to say, they were looking out for me. I was going through my chemo treatment. I was right here in Madison. And my buddy said, hey, you can't sit around just waiting for your next treatment. We need to keep you busy. We got to find something for you to do. And they're in the TV and the sports industry. And they said, how about, you think of an idea, we'll put a studio down in your basement. You can break down plays. You can figure out, how to put something that we can get out there so people can watch you describe the game of hockey in some way, shape, or form. And we just started throwing ideas at each other. And you know what it's like going through treatment, Luke. There's some really tough days. And there were days where I was looking for things to be inspired by and be motivated by. And fortunately for me, I had lots of people, including yourself, that would reach out to me regularly and kind of share the journey and what I was going through. And lots of those people had either dealt with cancer or different things in their lives, and they became inspiring to me. So we came up with this idea that if things are inspiring to me of hearing of other people's stories and their journeys of beating, whether it be cancer, whether it be life trauma, those were inspirational to me. And so we decided to break down Doug McLeod, who is professor here at the university in the journalism school, was one of those friends. And he started to look into stories and started to bring them to me and said, you got to see this story about Clint Malarchuk. You got to see this story, about Craig Cunningham. We went on and on. And we put together a list of hundreds of athletes that have gone through life traumas, whether it be cancer, whether it be serious injury, whether it be mental health struggles, whether it be addiction. And they've been able to get on the positive side of it and be role models for those that are dealing with their own situation. So we did we did a pilot with Clint Malarchuk. He was the goalie. If you guys remember Steve Tuttle, an old Badger, Steve Tuttle crashed into the net playing for the St. Louis Blues, and his skate came up accidentally and cut Clint Malarchuk's neck. And it got his jugular and probably should have bled out. But fortunately, there was a trainer that was on the bench that knew what to do because of his experiences that he had overseas at war. So he was able to slow the bleeding down enough that the doctors could clamp it. He lived. He's had multiple other issues that was associated with that injury, including PTSD. And so we did the pilot on him. He's doing great. He's a friend of mine. That pilot went on NHL Network month of July. So we got a good start with that one. We got Eddie Olczyk, Craig Cunningham, two other spectacular stories that are being edited right now that'll hit the network actually on October 1st and November 1st. And we're planning on doing 8 episodes in season 1. All will be in the game of hockey. And then once we get through season 1, we're planning on expanding out to other sports and different ideas.
That's terrific. So right now it's on the NHL Network. Is that how
It's on
people
NHL
would
Network.
access it?
It is. What we're trying, it'll be on YouTube soon. It'll be on our website soon. This all came about fast with NHL Network wanting it in July. We weren't quite up to date with everything we needed to be to have it be distributed in different ways. The most important thing for us is if there is somebody out there that needs to be inspired by a story, we want them to see it. So we're not trying to sell anything. It's a nonprofit. We're all doing this. All our 4 partners are doing it with the kindness of their heart to try to share a story that, what stories are, Luke. I don't have to tell you this. When you find somebody that's beating something, it gives you a little bit extra. And our goal is to get it out, whether it be on YouTube, whether it be on our website, some sort of platform that if somebody needed it and somebody saw or heard about it, can give a friend a message, hey, you got to watch this. This is something that might help.
That is former Badger men's hockey coach Tony Granata talking to Mike Lucas and Tom Oates on their Capital Times podcast, Lucas and Oates, part of Idea Fest 2025 earlier this week, and bringing Dan Schaefer, our civic media political editor and founder of the Recombobulation Area, back in. Dan, I wanted to play that because I think it's a great example of what Idea Fest is. It can be as diverse as that. A Badger coach talking about his fight with cancer and using it for something positive, to what we're going to hear in just a minute, which is Governor Tim Walz.
Yeah, absolutely. A great range of topics and just such a very Madison event here, isn't it?
It really is.
And I'm excited to hear, from Governor Walz. I don't know if he's made many, public statements or anything like since the assassination that occurred this week. But, given his experience on the campaign trail last year and dealing with, potential threats or things like that, I'm interested to see if that, comes up in this conversation and what he might have to say about that as well. And I think it goes to the spirit of the larger festival is just to sit down and have a conversation.
That conversation is straight ahead. Dan Schaefer, thank you very much. Tim Walz is next. Many thanks to Parker Olson, Donnelly, and Mr. Aaron Zommers as well. Luke Mathers. For all of us, I'm Todd Allball, the Civic Media World Headquarters. Tim Walz and John Nichols, live from UW-Madison, is next across our network and across Wisconsin. It's coming up on 7:30, and you're listening to the Civic Media Radio Network.
I've been backstage, and this is going to be a lot of fun, this next session. Most of us here in Madison probably feel we've gotten to know Minnesota Governor Tim Walz pretty well over the past 15 months or so. And I just want to say we are ecstatic to have him at IdeaFest tonight. Before our marquee program, I do want to take a minute to thank our sponsors who really make this whole thing possible. Our major sponsors again this year are Epic, Exact Sciences, and UW Health, the Carbone Cancer Center. Thank you. We so appreciate them. Thank you. Our co-sponsors are Madison Gas and Electric, the University Research Park, the University of Wisconsin, Madison, the University, the Century House, the Penzi Spices, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, the Madison Community Foundation, Cargo Coffee, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the Forward Theater Company, Leopold's Books, Bar, Cafe, and Madison College. Thank you. Thank you. Let's give them a hand. Our media partners are Hinckley Productions, Civic Media, Wisconsin Public Radio, the Wisconsin State Journal, and Madison.com. Hand for them as well. Thank you. Thanks to all of them. Backstage tonight, we've been visiting with the governor. I'm already really charged up for this. So Timothy James Walz was born and grew up in a small Nebraska town. After high school, he worked in a factory and joined the Army National Guard. He later graduated from college and in 1996 moved to Minnesota, where he famously taught social studies and coached football. The future governor became involved in politics and was elected to Congress 5 times. He was elected governor in 2018, re-elected in 2022, just as our own Tony Evers. Governor Walz, of course, became a prominent national figure last year when then Vice President Kamala Harris selected him as her running mate. He has continued to speak out effectively and with passion throughout the country against Donald Trump and Trumpism. His state has endured 2 horrific acts of gun violence this year, and he is pushing new gun laws there. We're talking, yes, indeed. We were talking how this week's shooting and the outrageousness of the reactions, of the contrasting reactions, only serves to highlight the issue again. Just a quick aside, the Minnesota governor's appearance continues our success at securing awesome speakers from our neighbor to the northwest. In our first IdeaFest in 2017, we hosted Senator Amy Klobuchar. 2 years ago, we hosted Attorney General Keith Ellison. John Nichols, associate editor of the Cap Times and tonight's moderator, says that the Attorney General told people in Minnesota that the Twin Cities should have an event like this one. I kind of like that. Word apparently got around, and so when John contacted Governor Walz's team, he was the first major commitment we had to this year's Idea Fest. From my standpoint, that was really important. I think I can speak for everyone in this theater tonight to say we are deeply grateful to him and him for appearing in Madison tonight. Please give a warm welcome to Governor Tim Walz.
It looks like you're going to have to establish yourself with these people.
Well, I was saying that was incredibly kind. I said, I hope you feel the same way when we're done. So,
could go bad. Yeah, I know. It's, you know, I just to put you at ease.
That felt loaded, didn't it?
Yeah. Just so you know, the county you're in voted 75% for you and Harris.
Highly educated people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The city was up in the mid-80s for you and Harris.
Dang.
And some of the precincts around here busted 90%. So just so you know, it was
good.
You might have wanted to share some of that out in other places, but
we have to figure that out.
Yeah. Man. They liked you here. As we start out, I just want to make note, and the lights are down so we can't see it. And you know, to be very honest with you, Idea Fest attracts an audience that includes many people who have experience in life. But I will tell you, having watched, what?
I'm seeing some pretty young
Well, this is what I was going to say. I will tell you, having watched every Idea Fest this week and in the past, aside from Bernie Sanders, the person who has drawn the largest number of young people to an event is Governor Walz. And there's a whole crowd of UW students and other folks around here. You can't see them, but they're there.
I see them.
And I don't know what it is. What is it about Walz that appeals to the young?
Man, that's a good question. I got asked last week. They said, you poll much better amongst women than men. And I looked at my wife and she said, don't ask me. I don't know. I don't know that one. No, I do think on this, I think it's the teaching. I think spending so many years in the classroom, and I would hope what they're getting that vibe is the genuine respect, because I always said, when those of you who are teachers in this room, thank you for that, but I also, but you know, when you're a brand new teacher and that first day you go in the classroom and you know everything, and then you come back on the second day and you know nothing, and you spend 20 years learning it, I learned very quickly on, I was certainly not the smartest person in that classroom. I was usually the most experienced, as you said, but it was life experiences, and I think it was that connection through teaching, which I think is what I was truly born for. Probably more so than being vice president. So
the American people gave you a cue on that one. But let me ask you about, this is an interesting thing. You were backstage before we came on. You were meeting with a bunch of young folks who had staffed rallies and events that you had done. And it was a very interesting thing. You said to them, the first political rally I went to was when I was 41 years old.
Yeah. Look, remember the times when we had the luxury that you didn't have to be that engaged and the world didn't burn down around you, and you wouldn't see the president for like 4 months and you're like, oh, I'm glad he's okay, and you would just kind of move on. But look, I was teaching school, actively engaged in the National Guard, and I voted and I was engaged, but as a social studies teacher, I wasn't at events. I didn't do those, wasn't actively political. And I think it's just life was coming at me. And I tell the story, I did a deployment with the National Guard, came back, and it was the 2004 election. And I was kind of a John Kerry guy, and I got back sometime that summer. And George Bush was coming to Mankato in August of that year. And I had some fellow teachers say, Tim, we're going to be out of town. Would you take these kids to see George Bush? And I'm like, yeah. And look, I didn't really care much for the guy. At that time, I thought, man, it'll never get worse than Bush. And now I'm like, yeah. Now we want to buy his paintings and crap, I'm like, so. But I wasn't really active, and I don't think a lot of people knew, obviously probably leaning pretty progressive, the things we did, that was clear. But anyway, I said, sure, I'll take them. We get to this rally, and these kids were politically active. They were young Dems, so they knew it. And one of them pulled out his billfold and had a John Kerry sticker on it. And you had to have tickets to get in this thing. And the people at the event said, well, I'm sorry, you've been deemed a threat to the president. You're going to have to go back, because you had to drive a bus to the event and get back. And I said, oh, no, they're fine. They're with me. And they said, who are you? I said, oh, I'm their teacher. I'm Tim Walz. I'll vouch for them. They're all good. No problems on this. And they said, do you have a ticket? I said, yeah. They said, well, you too have been deemed a threat to the president. And this was my first thing, and this is in my hometown, and people are walking by. I'm like, hey, Gary, saying hi to friends and stuff. Politics wasn't quite that corrosive, but anyway, I said, no, it's fine. I said, that's not true. And then it started to get kind of serious. They said, well, you're going to get on the bus and leave, or you're going to be detained and, taken out of here. And at this point in time, I'm like all puffed up. I'm like, well, I'm in the military. I just got back. They didn't care.
And then to be a football coach.
And then I gave them this one. I said, I'm the teacher of the year in Mankato. And they really didn't care. And then I said, okay, here's what's going to happen. Those kids are going to get on the bus, and I'm going to go in there, and then you're going to decide whether President Bush's speech is front page or the local high school teacher and football coach, National Guardsman, gets arrested for wanting to see the president. Well, if you behave, we'll take you there. We'll do that. So they stood beside me. The kids went back and said, Mrs. Walz, Mr. Walz got arrested. And she's like, damn it, he can't do anything. and the whole neighborhood's blowing up or whatever. And I come home, but I'll tell you the thing was, it was more feeling a sense of shame, like the privilege of not being engaged actively in politics because of this. And there I was, saying, well, I'm this guy, I do this or whatever, in front of my neighbors. And I watched these people look right through me. And like it didn't matter, and they didn't care. And I was just ashamed, a little bit. I'm like, God dang, we got to do something. So I got involved in the John Kerry campaign. Long story, he loses. Somebody says, well, you should run for Congress. You did a good job with that. And I'm like, okay, I don't know, no one, and I'm glad I didn't know it at the time, one Democrat since 1892 had won that district. And so I didn't realize I was the sucker that they were putting forward. So, but long story short, I got engaged. So those young people and people getting engaged and being there, I am just in awe of them. I'm inspired by them, that they know how it is. And that campaign, by the way, 4 of my former students, all 4 young women, super talented. 1 graduated from Marquette, 1 from University of Wisconsin, 2 from Minnesota. And those 4 women ran that campaign. And then when we started getting hot and it got into October and it looked like we were going to win, and I tell him this, Rahm Emanuel was running the DCCC, he said, all right, we're going to give you some money, but you got to get new staff. I said, keep your money, I'm keeping them. And he gave the money anyway. So Rahm gave the money. And they were, look, we were 5 people who didn't really know what we were doing, but we were pretty passionate about it. And I see that with young people. So I think that's why, but I don't know. Maybe I graded easily. That's why they like me. So
that's a pretty good story. And I think the lesson of it is that if the Bush camp and the people around him had just been smart enough to let you in without a question, you'd still be teaching in Mankato.
Oh, this gets better. Like I win, and the first quote I get in the paper was, the press is there, and they announced that I win that night. Remember that 2006 wave? I was the last ones getting washed up on the shore when all the Democrats won. And I looked to my wife and I said, I don't even know what this job is. I had not been in the Capitol. I took a close-up trip to Washington with kids, but I had never been in the Capitol. And all of a sudden, there I was. So before they swear you in, they take you to the White House, and we go in there, and it's George Bush, who, by the way, he and Barbara were so gracious, they have you in there. But Karl Rove was in there. And remember that? Again, remember we thought he was the worst it could get. And So Rove walks up, and I was going to introduce him because I'm like all these people I'd seen on TV, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in the White House. This is so great. And I go over, I said, Mr. Rove, he goes, I know who you are. He goes, I have one question. Where'd you find all the Norwegians to vote? And he knew that voting district to the number, and he said, you increased turnout by 3%, and that was probably enough to help you win. And like, he knew all those things that were out there. And that one kind of blew me away, that one, he knew, and secondly, how it just seemed kind of like a game to him, more so like he knew the numbers and didn't know it. So yeah, and then he did say, yeah, it'd probably been easier just to let you in the event. And
there you go.
So
Kyle Rove, a very good political analyst,
Yeah,
has sussed your career out. So what you did there is part of why you've been so successful as a political figure. You're self-deprecating, you're witty, you're charming. And
I should have brought my wife. I knew that.
Yeah. And no, but that's a part of it in politics. This is the nature of politics. But you also there told a story of a time in politics that now seems like ancient history, and that's, I find that jarring.
It's
people
jarring.
ask me about this all the time. They'll say, well, like, must love covering politics. I said, I did love covering politics for a long time. Now I feel it's more like a duty or a responsibility. It's a very different thing. Politics has become a much harder, crueler experience. And we'll talk about your political career a lot, but I think we should begin tonight, after you've kind of framed us and give us perspective on where we were. This has been one of the most jarring several months in the history of American politics. And this week we had the horrific shooting of Charlie Kirk in Utah, and all the play out of that. And it reminded us, of course, those of us who actually pay attention, and I know that's not always the case in media, but those of us who pay attention, that up in Minnesota, not very long before, you had a horrific political assassination, a pair of political assassinations by someone who had a list of legislators, and I think you were on the list, along with the Attorney General and lots of other folks, and many Wisconsin legislators as well. And so that's the dark side of where we're at right now, because we have come to a point where political violence is not something we can say is foreign. Obviously, it's never been foreign. We've had assassinations in the past. But now it seems to be coming at us in some unbelievably unsettling ways. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, as somebody who knew several of the people who were killed, to talk about this a little bit in this stark moment we're in.
No, well, I appreciate you bringing it up. And look, it's still very visceral, and it is jarring. I heard someone on, I don't listen to NPR or something, why we still can, listening to someone mention, and they said they were making the comparison that, look, we had President Kennedy's assassination, Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy, Medgar Evers. We had all these things happening, and they said, so, how it felt. And this person was an older person who was engaged in politics, and they said, yes, and when those happened, they were horrific, but they felt horrific and not ordinary. What's different now is it feels more ordinary, and that's terrifying. That's what this person said. And I don't know, I'm too close to it and too much in that grieving and processing stage of the anger and all of this comes, because just to let all of you know, the media moves on, every single individual, but just a singular force in Minnesota with Melissa Hortman. And I don't think outside there that we know, as I said, without a doubt, she'd have been a governor, and I think a really good one. And I think in Minnesota, we talk about her in the same breath as like a Mondale or Wellstone, and she had that type. She was the most talented. I said, there's two people I saw could run a House floor, who could manage a caucus, who could message, who could think policy, and who could actually get things done, and it was her and Nancy Pelosi. And that was an amazing thing. And she was my closest political ally. And
a big part of your success.
Oh, without a doubt. We wouldn't have got it done. We had a one-vote majority, and I said that majority has led to free school breakfast, paid family medical leave, 24. Yeah. She understood that the politics was a means to an end, and we were tied at the hip to get it done and to get a call at 4 a.m. But what was more jarring about it is it was happening. This guy was on the steps. We're trying to get him. All that's happening in real time while we're trying to do that. And then to turn on the TV and see the President of the United States, like just flippantly saying things to me, like, you know, he's a mess, he's doing this or whatever. And I'm like, how do something like this happen, and how does it become about you? Or how does it become about me? And just that, the thing that terrified me in this whole thing, and it still terrifies me, just the lack of basic humanity, regardless of the politics of it, is really there. So and then as it bleeds into, and then of course we had the Annunciation shooting last weekend. We had a celebration of life for an 8-year-old, for Fletcher, and this Sunday we'll go with the parents and we'll have Harper's. That's what Minnesota's living through. And then this comes out this week, and you see the first thing is to go hard to blaming, to ginning more of this up. And I've said this, that I don't tend to overreact. I think high school teachers in here know you'd be dead if you overreacted all the time. You just kind of do your stuff. So it's not like it. But look, it's very raw, it's very open. But I am deeply concerned, deeply worried about this, and I've been saying it on the political side of things, and now it's entered this new phase. So I wish I had something profound to tell you, but it really is about people just being decent and recognizing it and saying it. And if you're not going to do that, it's very hard to fix it. I mean, that's the thing, this whole thing about how do you fix somebody else on this. If you're not going to go to that space, I have a real hard time is how do we talk about it? How do we bring people back into this conversation in a way that is productive? And I don't have an answer to that. And I don't know if the country does right now.
I think the country is wrestling with it. I was struck by the Texas legislator and U.S. Senate candidate, James Tallarico, who's kind of rising up. And
yeah, I like that guy.
You like that guy?
I like him.
Well, and there's other candidates, and but I was struck by his response to it because he is a devout Christian, and he, although I think if he was, as an individual, if he was Jewish or Hindu or whatever, he would have gone to a spiritual place. But he talked after the murder of Charlie Kirk and said, we certainly had differences, without a doubt, fundamental. And yet, he said, I'm taught that he is my brother, and that we are human beings of the same blood, of the same traditions, or whatever. And it was this very, it was a very human and I think unexpected response. That someone would go to that place, to go to a spiritual place, and I think I was fascinated by it. I don't know what more to say.
Well, he's a good person, because I'll be honest, that's not necessarily where I went immediately on some of this, because I'm serious, and I mean it just because I've said this, and I've been very candid. I've said it publicly, and I don't like it that it's true, but I said specifically, the president brings out the worst in me, and it makes my worst self. We used to have a saying, you lay with dogs, you get fleas, type of thing, and I just feel it's even deeper than that, and it pushes me in a position like I'm trying to figure out, how do you push back and debate a policy position when it is so visceral, it's so personal, and it is so loathsome of how do you get there. So I find myself getting into a place where it goes against my nature. I know it's not as generous a space as I need to be in when I see this, and I'm trying to figure that out. Look, the outrage of this week, the family and everything that went on, and you can disagree with the policies, but it was the response from some people afterwards, the very people who couldn't even call the children of Melissa and couldn't even do that. I don't understand how you can separate that. I don't understand how you can separate. I don't understand how you cannot see the children that lost a father this week and the children who lost a father and mother in June. How in your mind do you separate the humanity on that based on the politics? And yet there's a big chunk of the country is able to do that very easily. So no, I appreciate going there, and I think you're trying to find answers. I keep going back to it. I mean, I don't know how we respond as a nation on those types of things happening, and then children sitting in church on the first day of school and being shot, and then we're in this thing about, the guns or whatever. It is the guns, I'm telling you, and let's have the discussion on it. And how do you get there? And then how do you have that debate? Because it disintegrates into this, and then all of a sudden you're disrespectful on this. Like I said, we need to get mean in our politics, and they immediately say Governor Walz is adding to this climate, which may be a valid point, but I don't know how you push back on the cruelness that's out there without yourself being a little cruel. And it's a real dilemma, and we're going to have to figure it out.
I just want to tell folks, you just saw a very rare thing in politics, which is a prominent political figure, former candidate for Vice President of the United States, saying, I'm wrestling with this, I don't know how to deal with it. And that is often in politics seen as weakness, to acknowledge, I don't have the perfect answer to every question. But I think that has been a part of your strength in politics. You came in late. You were born in a small town in Nebraska. You went into teaching. That was your career, and served in the National Guard. And you had a life. And you didn't come into politics until you were an adult. Some people would even say edging toward middle age. Yep. Although in our crowd tonight, we say we're still very young. And yeah. So, but this is a significant thing. Do you think there is some chance that you came into politics having had enough of life that you were willing to acknowledge sometimes that you didn't know all the answers?
Yeah, I think so, and I don't. This is a new phenomenon that has happened. I think I'm a big early adapter on the internet. We had a T1 line back in the early '90s. Some of the tech people in here know this, in western Nebraska, so that we could teach languages to those rural schools. And I taught myself HTML. I created a website, and I was like selling trips to Tibet on the internet. And I remember I sold 10 of them. I sold 10 of them as a teacher. I made $1,000 extra on each one, so I made $10,000. And I remember this is 1991, 92, and I told my wife, I said, I think there's money to be made on the internet. And then with my political acumen, I moved on. And but
just to be clear, you didn't invest.
But I think it was the idea of a set of life experiences that were very different, and I was shaped by it. That it wasn't through. I didn't. Look, I was a Democrat, but I didn't go to the Democrats. The Democrats came to me. It was just natural. It was Social Security survivor benefits for my family. It was the GI Bill. It was Pell Grants at college. And I becoming a young adult, I'm like, well, the Democrats seem to be the people who support us, and the Republicans support the businesses and the country clubs. Not even as a pejorative. It was just known to everybody. And I think I kind of lived my life like that, and grateful. I grew up Catholic, but some of you of a certain age, like me, the priest in our small community was a liberation theologist, and that was a very interesting. Yeah, some of you know that was a very interesting.
We should explain to some of the college students here that liberation theology actually
very grounded in the social activism of the church. Very grounded in helping. A lot of these folks were active when in the 70s and 80s in Central America and others. It was especially coming out of the nuns who were there too, that they were very active. And we were strong, Catholic church every week, Wednesday, CCD, and then during certain times of the year, you had to go in the mornings, and I, as a usual kid, my mom would drag me in there. I didn't know it in our family. We had priests in the family and had people actively engaged, and they thought a priest would come out of my mom, Darlene's family, and she always said she thought it would be me. How wrong could she have been? And they went into, look where I ended up. But I just think it was that. And I am convinced of this, like we have this discussion about age in politics and about experience in politics. And I think all of you in different organizations you work for, I especially see it in school. The most successful schools, in my opinion, are the ones that have that wonderful mix of mid-career teachers who are just, getting it done, know how to do it. Those are at the end of their career who are wonderful, beloved, but ready for the retirement checks. And which is true, because you do this job until you retire, you deserve the damn check. And then, like my wife and I, the young teachers who come in, we did everything. We coached everything. We built the set. My wife was doing, what were we doing? We were doing Of Mice and Men, and she's helping direct the play. I'm doing the set, so I have all my kids in there, with drills, and we're fixing stuff. And she said, Mr. Walz, we are almost at showtime. I need a door on this. I need a screen door that slams when we go out and shoot the dog, and I need it there. No problem. Come back after the little break or whatever, and there's a screen door on there. And she's like, well, thank you for that. We go home, and it was my screen door up my house. And so, but we didn't have kids. We didn't have anything else. We didn't have anything else to do. So we just did it all. And I would argue the same thing is true in politics. That there's this idea that we force. We want young people. We do want young people in politics. We want those voices. But we also need the folks who lived other lives and had different experiences. And we need folks who have been there. The older teachers would hold us together when we needed to. And I think in our politics, the ability to get more of a cross-section. But look, all of us know why there's not a lot of young people in politics, because it's, gerrymandered districting and money in politics that makes it impossible. The idea of a teacher with no political experience, no name recognition, and I know I repeat myself because I said I was a teacher, no money and no connections, to win a congressional seat is a testament to Minnesota, to be honest, that the party is there, that you could still do it. And when I got there, everybody has that story. Everybody's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, except their parents were federal judges or something like this. You're like, oh, I see. But no, I think it's that mix. And I think for me, coming in late was really good. And to be honest with you, I'm pretty agnostic about things and trying to get things done. I'll go back to that internet thing that I got on, is where I started on this, is great promise, but it created everybody's got a damn opinion about everything. Where did we lose the thing when you didn't have to have an opinion on everything? So I don't know about that. And I remember you'd go to places and you would somebody would be talking about something and you'd say, well, I don't know shit about that. And then and you know who we would listen to? The people who knew shit. We would listen to them. And then we would say, they knew this. And I kind of took politics that way. If you didn't know, you'd go to these people, they would bring you ideas, and we would work it through. Now, there's just this idea you have to have an opinion on every single thing. You have to express it. And then I made this case backstage. I think we've got a White House that sees every single interaction as a zero sum. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose in every single situation. And look, there's no such thing as that. There is no such thing in life. And if you want to get a good trade deal, your partners need to get a good trade deal. If you want to get legislation, you've got to compromise with the other side, and you both get a little something, and it works for everybody. That's not how they see it. They have to pound someone down. Someone has to lose in every single situation. And I think it is incredibly dangerous, and it's bringing us to a point where I don't know how you govern when it's that way, because life is not zero sum. Life is not somebody wins and somebody loses, but that's how they see it. And right now, they're winning. The billionaires are winning, and they seem okay with that.
You're listening to WAUK Jackson, Milwaukee, WMDX Columbus, Madison, WCFW HD2 W228 EP Chippewa Falls, WFHR Wisconsin Rapids, WLAK Amory, and WLCX La Crosse, a part of the Civic Media Radio Network.
You know, the weirdest thing of this whole crazy journey and all this is I couldn't have been more surprised to wake up with my head stapled to the carpet that I would be in a damn fight with the richest man in the world. Go do something else, for God's sakes. This guy's fighting with me online and doing these types of things. When is enough for these people? When's enough money? When's enough do you have to run everything? And I'll say this, and I've talked to Bernie a lot about this. I think one of the issues that we get he's 100% right, and he's been talking about it a long time. But I think where Democrats get ourselves into a trap is when we message some of this, it looks like we're against success. We don't want somebody to succeed, or we don't want maybe, and I know maybe some people don't believe it, and fair enough on this with capitalism. Is there a moral capitalism where we can celebrate success? And I said, my beef is not with successful people. My beef is with people who get successful and then don't pay their taxes and act like terrible people and make it more difficult for the rest of us. That's the beef. So I don't think we've messaged that. I think, like I ask people, how is Donald Trump getting some of these people to vote for him? How is he getting some of these, folks thinking that? And they said, look, Donald Trump, especially in the 80s with group people, showed this wealth. It's that ostentatious show of wealth, the gaudy gold and all of that or whatever. But there's a sense of, well, I want to make it. I want to make a difference or whatever. And I think Democrats, because we do a good job of this, we want to be there as, Hubert Humphrey said, those in the shadows of life, those that are having it most difficult. We want to lift up and help our neighbors. But I think there's a whole group of people in America that feel like those programs aren't helping them and nobody's working for their success. And I think Democrats understand the Paul Wellstone thing. We all do better when we all do better. Lift everybody up and make that case.
So you were talking about having a beef with certain folks. I got a beef with you. And this is a pretty serious thing.
You're not the richest man in the world, so it's not as scary. But,
well, I don't know.
It's
You have no idea.
He does buy his ink in 50-gallon drums,
I've been
so that's
throwing
it.
my change into a box every night when I get home, and it's getting pretty heavy. Now I got a beef with you. I'm multi-generational Wisconsinite, and I happen to believe this is the greatest state.
It is a great state.
No, the greatest state. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
And I've also always thought that this is the most progressive state. This is the state of Robert M. La Follette,
yes,
and all these great traditions. Yeah, they should applaud for that, of course.
They should.
Yeah.
This is the home of labor unions, the home of
stuff like this.
Co-ops, yeah.
So this is my beef with you, and it's pretty serious. Back in 2010, there was a Republican wave, and your predecessor, Mark Dayton,
yeah,
he won by about 10,000 votes. It was a very close election back in 2010. And so you guys stayed Democratic, and you were able to keep gerrymandering in the legislature, at least to some extent, and stuff like that. And we had Scott Walker.
Yes.
And
this is a very important point. This is a divergent point. It very much is.
And this is my beef, actually.
Yeah.
Because, I don't want Wisconsin to be just, in the Garrison Keillor tradition or whatever. It's a little bit better than Minnesota. And it, just for the last 15 years, you guys have been kind of pacing us on a lot of stuff. And so explain to me what the difference between Wisconsin and Minnesota is.
No, this is important. By the way, as a side note to this, Mark Dayton and those 10,000 votes, some of you might in here know this, but it'll really, you know who he beat? Tom Emmer, the number 3 guy in the House, who I was friends with and had gone trap shooting with and I feel like he's lost. We did an impromptu charity event in D.C. where we did impromptu theater together, and now I just got subpoenaed to go out there, and he just treats me like hell. And anyway, side note to that, look, we said this. That division, that election was the most important thing that happened, I think, in Minnesota history, and Mark Dayton's win in 2010. I squeaked by kind of with a third-party candidate got in. I won that election in 2010 in my congressional district by, I think I ended up with 47% of the vote because we split it.
So you didn't get the majority. It was
I didn't
a tough
get the
one
majority.
for you. Mark Dayton did win by about 10,000 votes. It was very, very intense, very
Changed
close.
the entire trajectory of the state.
That's exactly right. And we, in that same election, went another direction that continues, although we have a very good Democratic governor now. But it
Yeah, give Tony Evers
Tony
one.
Evers,
So.
yeah. But we still have,
I'll tell you what first of all, my 2018 kind of non-official campaign, it was One Minnesota was my official campaign theme, but my non-official campaign theme, and labor unions were all over this, telling people in 2018 they had to vote, it's Walz or Wisconsin, people. We're going to go right down the way of Wisconsin. Scott Walker, we're going to lose everything. We're going to come right to work. And I will say this.
That doesn't make me feel all that
No,
good.
no, but I will say this in full disclosure. All those things are true, and Minnesotans did see Wisconsin as more progressive. Minnesotans understood the history. And to be very candid, for some of you more experienced people in here will know, but for the younger folks, this might strike you as odd. Iowa was moving with us. Iowa voted for Barack Obama overwhelmingly. And this wasn't that long ago. Now, I say that as an optimism. If you remember after the 2004 election, it's like we were going to be in the wilderness forever. 2006, I'm in Congress. 2008, an unknown senator from Illinois is president, and there we go. And then we passed the Affordable Care Act, and we're back down. The oscillation of this. Now, I think it's going to be harder because these guys are cheating and gerrymandering and stopping mail-in voting and all that. But once it divided, what Minnesota understood after that election was a re-energizing of the party. And I will make the case on this is, we're winning elections in Minnesota, not that our demographics are that different. We are strictly a purple state. Our numbers look almost the same as Michigan, as Pennsylvania, as Wisconsin. But we continue to win because of the party organization. And it's down to the county level, it's down to the city level. And there's just such an emphasis that we've been able to pull people over on simply organizing on a broader scale. And we get high voter turnout, just like you. So the way out of this is just going to have to be massive organization. And look, it is crap. Again, I wish I could just go home and not think about the president and not be engaged. We don't have that luxury. And it's going to have to be to organize ourselves out of it. I know it sounds like a cliche, and most of it is just grind it out, get people out there. Everybody's looking for, what's the message that Democrats can make? I don't know. I thought we were making it, but I'll tell you what didn't work. 70 million people stayed home. I have very little confidence we're going to move a lot of these people. At this point in time, you still think Donald Trump's good? You're there. You're there. I mean, that's just where it is. But there's too many people that we can get to. And I think Wisconsin is figuring that out. I think you had in Ben and now in Devin, you have a state party. You proved it to the country. The organizing around the Supreme Court special election was just amazing, inspiring. So it's organizing. And man, I'm telling you, these elections matter so much. And just the divergence between Mark Dayton's 2 terms. When I won in 2018, that is the first time in Minnesota history that there were 3 Democratic terms in a row. That's the first time it ever happened, which allowed us to build on that momentum and shift us towards a much more progressive values. And isn't it weird when you do that? We rank near the top in happiness, rank near the top in, places to raise kids, rank near the top in personal incomes and all that. And I'm just going to say it. If their policies work so well, Arkansas and Mississippi would not be at the bottom of where they're at because their policies don't work.
Well, you made me feel a little bit better, and I will just tell you that eventually we're gonna do what we have to do. And
side note here, Mississippi's last gubernatorial election, the Democrat lost by 3 points.
Yes,
just so we
and
know.
he was Elvis Presley's cousin.
That helps.
Yeah.
I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
Just to be clear. So good stuff, and I think soon we'll reestablish our Midwestern dominance, and then you can stop bragging about your 10,000 lakes, and we'll get on to some serious business.
We do not count mud holes like you do in Wisconsin, so we do not. We do not.
Okay. All right. I think we better get into some serious business here, and the Democratic nominee for mayor of New York City, Zoran Mamdani, was asked recently who, aside from Bernie Sanders and AOC, he thought was really, an accomplished person, really kind of a role model in politics, or somebody who at least showed an example of how to do politics. And he said Tim Walz. And
that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And as I understand it, I was talking to one of his aides the other day about this, and as I understand it, they said, well, why Tim Walz? He doesn't live in Manhattan. And he said, because as governor, he got a whole bunch of stuff done.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to give you the you're just, and because again, as Wisconsin, I don't want this to get too out of control, but I'm going to give you a couple minutes to tell us a little bit what is referred to as the Minnesota miracle.
Yeah, and this is a key point too, and this is another thing I would tell Democrats is when you win elections and you've got power, you don't bank that political capital to win the next election. You burn it to improve lives, because not only then did you improve lives, you show the people who worked their tails off and gave you money and door knocked on this that their lives improved almost immediately. I had a young staffer who got on our campaign and worked for us, and then in 2023, we did pass everything, paid family and medical leave, 20 weeks, most generous in the country. We did 2040, we're going to totally decarbonize our electric grid by 2040. They told us we couldn't do it. They're right. We're going to finish in 2035. And so we codified, first state to codified women's reproductive rights. We had the biggest investment in college education. If you make less than $80,000 a year, your family, and then on a sliding scale, it's free college at any of our universities in Minnesota. And just write down the list of things. We made sure that we strengthened labor unions as the core piece of this. You can't have anti-labor work. And we moved all those things as quickly as possible. And there was this, and then like we got down to the end, we had a very racist state flag, so we changed the state flag into this new beautiful one. We got rid of some of those things. We passed recreational cannabis, for adult use cannabis. We did all these things.
We're still working on that here.
I know. But I had a young volunteer that's like, well, that wasn't so hard. We won the election and we got all this stuff done. That's great. But I saw it on that. I'm like, there's an entire generation of us who were told, just be patient. There was no fierce sense of urgency. There was no direct connection between busting my butt for a candidate, electing them, going into a session. Hell, my life's a lot better now because of this. So what happens? We win the next election, and we're there. So the good politics follows the good policy. And I think what Mondami's talking about is that also being proud on this. When I first was out there and got picked by Vice President Harris, I got put on one of the shows and they said, well, Governor, your policies are like way out. There's these liberal policies, whatever. And I said, oh my God, we feed our children and take care of our elderly and we can have health care and college. What a monster I am. And I think our mistake is don't let them frame us on this, because guess what? Our policies are super popular, our party not so much so. And I contest to this is because when we have the opportunity, we don't go big enough, we don't go bold enough, we don't pass the things, we don't stand with it. That's because I'll give you this. The Republicans and Donald Trump are sure showing us with this. So, and I said, we will win. And when we win back next time, we better have the same sense of purpose and urgency and Project 2025. And instead of crushing the rule of law and scooping people up and deporting or whatever, we're going to go crazy and give people health care. And we're going to go crazy and make sure that college is more affordable. And we're going to attack climate change, all these things. Just have some courage to go after it. And I think we're still so stuck in this. And this is what I go back to the beginning of this conversation, trying to work inside the system, trying to compromise. I will compromise on things, if it's taxations or some of that. I'm not going to compromise on fascism. I'm not going to compromise on reproductive rights. I'm not going to compromise on climate. And I think you said it, and I believe this is true. It was Bill Clinton. It's better to be right and weak than wrong and strong type of thing. I think we have to project both on this. I think we have to project that don't mistake our kindness for weakness, but be bold about passing these things. Now all of a sudden those casual 70 million are like, you know what, I'm going to go vote for these people because damn, it's really nice that I don't lose my job when my child had to get chemo and I can take them in and I'm not going broke because of this. And, all of the things that make a difference. We had a whiteboard when we passed all the things you're talking about all the way through. And I remember we got about halfway through the session, we had about 5 or 6 things passed and people were like, wow, what a successful session. And it was Melissa Hortman said, what the hell are you talking about? We're doing everything. We're passing everything. And we just went right down there. We passed, you know how they turn you into the credit reporting and just ruin your credit, make it difficult to get insurance in a house because you had a medical bill that was a bunch of crap and you couldn't pay it. So in Minnesota, we said, you cannot report medical bills to the credit reporting agencies. You can't do that. Can't do it.
You wanted to be the Democratic nominee for vice president. And I'll tell you, I'd say it, and you can push back.
I'll give you the story of how I ended up getting it.
But let me take you back a second. As there was this very difficult moment with Joe Biden standing down, Kamala Harris stepping up. Kamala Harris was raised in Madison, by the way. Right?
Yeah, I know that.
Not in Minnesota.
No, I knew that.
Okay, just to be clear. So Kamala Harris stepping up, and she needed to pick a vice presidential candidate. And in that, there was this sort of, it wasn't a campaign, but there was a point where the people who were interested in being vice president went on TV shows, and they showed a little bit of their skill. And you did that, and I would argue that you won a campaign for the vice presidential nomination without it actually being any kind of formal campaign, because you went out and you did these TV appearances. You spoke in much the way that you were just speaking right now, and an awful lot of people who didn't even know you started to say, I like that. And I think so. Tell me about that journey. You can disagree with me on some elements of it, but just this sense that you went from being a Midwestern governor to being suddenly somebody a lot of people were very excited about.
Well, and it was, I would say this, and a privilege of a lifetime to be with Vice President Harris. And I remind people, just in case people, the humbleness and the work she did, just picture that you go home tonight and you're talking to whatever and you wake up tomorrow. Imagine what a Sunday morning would look like with Kamala Harris as president. Just imagine, I think about that, and that's what she was, but just the humbleness of it and doing that. But look, I would say this, I think it's public service, and I don't want to, like a false sense of humility. I really didn't think that's what we were trying to do, to try and get that. I was chair of the Democratic Governors Association, so I was pushing there. I was doing, whatever needed to be done, and we needed to start messaging all that. It did become kind of this Veep stakes thing or whatever, but when I talked to the vice president, I said, look, use me however you can. I just want to win. If that means going to Omaha and putting me there to get that one vote, which we did, by the way. And so I went there 3 times, and there was my people, but to try and make the case. But I do think it was, and I think this is a debatable piece about it, I was out there proudly espousing progressive things that we had done in Minnesota that improved lives. And I think there were people all across the country who said, well, damn it, I want that. I want to get those types of things. I wish we could do that at the national level. And I think that was part of it. And I think the real reason I got picked was I told the vice president, asked about the job, and I said, I don't know about the job, but I know what the org chart looks like. It's the president, and it's the chief of staff, and it's all the people who work for the president, and then it's the vice president down here. So just so you know. But no, I think it was out there. What I said, I think that model, remember how exciting it was during that time, though, and Donald Trump was not in the news, and all these incredible governors, J.B. Pritzker, Josh Shapiro, Tony Evers is out there, Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, Andy Beshear. People are like, holy shit, there's a bunch of really great governors in Kentucky, Democrats, and people were like, they're awesome. That is the model that I think we need right now, is because Donald Trump sucks up so much oxygen. He got frazzled. He wasn't in the news. The media was covering Democrats and covering a lot of Democrats doing good work. And all of a sudden, that whole thing was starting to shift on him. And I remember that's when I said, look, these guys are bad, but they're just weird as hell. I have spent 60 years using public restrooms, and I have no damn idea who's next to me and what's going on with them, because it's not my business. And to think how much they took on that, and I knew during that time period, Donald Trump did an interview. It was like a 15, 20-minute interview. 11 times he's told us he was not weird. Pretty self-conscious, And look, I think that whole thing was the model. I'm saying this, whether it's doing podcasts, whether it's doing let's all just say, the joy that Gavin Newsom has brought us over the last few weeks. Fabulous. And that is a serious governor running the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world, dealing with everything on that. But what Gavin understood is to get out there and fill that. Or you got Andy Bashir out there talking. Andy Bashir telling us, don't use words that people don't use in their daily lives. Talk the way they talk. And I think all of these different lanes, the more we fill them. I've been a big advocate, and I know it's not the Europeans do some things right. I think we need to acknowledge that. And right now, as Americans, we're like, damn, they do a lot of things right. The one thing they do is they have shadow parliament, or they have a shadow government that makes sure we keep them in check. And I know this is a bit controversial or whatever, but when things are going bad and the people who do the work, which is most of us, you see what happens when you have a national strike in France. They shut the whole damn thing down until something changes. So I just have to tell you, until America can get unified, especially the working class together, those are the things we should be doing. And I think that's what was happening during that time. That's all I was trying to do. And it was a privilege of a lifetime to run with the vice. Look, you had 107 days to try and change this thing around. We didn't get there. I own that. She owns it. But I think now more than ever, there is still a path forward. Look, they know that the midterms are trouble. They wouldn't be trying to suppress the vote. They wouldn't be trying to gerrymander Texas. Hell, if your politics are so popular, you're just going to win everywhere. No, they're not. They're not going to win everywhere. The problem is going to be they make it more difficult to vote and they gerrymander the districts. So we've got to push back every step of the way on that.
So I'll give you space there, okay? I'll say you were out there in this mix of folks, and then you just used the word weird at the right time and became the vice presidential nominee of a major
terrifying.
party.
Like some of you heard the story. They called, and I missed the call, of course, which is me.
Yes.
And then I got another call and said, pick up your damn phone. She called. And it is the most surreal thing. I'm sitting in my house. 20 minutes later, the helicopters are overhead. The people sweep in. My son is like, Dad, it's going crazy outside. And I'm in my house, and they said, well, we're going to Philadelphia. We're going to get packed right now. I said, I'll go get my stuff. They said, no, you wouldn't. We'll pack for you. And I'm like, you're going to pack my underwear for me and stuff? So it's a little strange.
A little weird.
And it just went like that, and it hit the ground. And I went from no one knew. That morning, I'm sitting in Mankato, Governor of Minnesota. That night, getting ready to walk out on stage with the Vice President of the United States as she's announced me in front of 15,000 people in Philadelphia and then on TV. And I meet up with her, and we're standing there in the dark, like coming off curtain or whatever, and she looks at me and she said, don't screw this up. And I'm like, okay. So I'm scared. I'm like, the whole thing was there is I had never used a teleprompter, and I had to use one in this. Like, this isn't some rinky-dink speech I'm giving, This is like a big deal. So when I got there, we had like 45 minutes. I went back in the shower of the Temple University locker rooms, and they had set up a stage with a teleprompter to show me how to use it. And I'm like, does this kind of feel like we're on a high wire with no net here? And they're like, yeah, that's it. All right.
So many of the people in the audience have not run for vice president. And
Minnesota, we're the home of vice presidents. Walter Mondale, Hubert Humphrey.
It's left and right.
Yeah.
But what was the most incredible thing, the most striking thing, we can use whatever word we want, that you took away from that experience? What was it about being the nominee of a major party for vice president, winning 75 million votes and stuff like that? Tell me about.
Well, it was, and I think we all need to remember this, just the deep decency of the American people. And, to be giving at these rallies or to be talking to people and listening to people's stories. A young woman in Ann Arbor, which was one of the most magical nights. It was a beautiful fall evening. The trees were colored. They'd lit them up. We're doing this big rally on the Ann Arbor campus. Maggie Rogers is going to sing. I have my daughter with me. And it just felt so right. It felt so good. And I'm walking down the rope line after speaking and talking. There was a young woman there with her child. He was probably about 3. And, she introduced it, and she said he lost his dad last year, and I just wanted to bring him and do these things. And people just sharing their very personal stories, and at a rally believing that there was something we could do together. And I got to see it, and I will tell you, for all the cruelness and all the people who do the bad stuff, whatever, my family got to see it in the most personal and probably the most broadcast moment ever. And as a father, I'll give you this, the greatest day of my life, the greatest moment is when I'm coming out, I'm going to be the nominee for Vice President of the United States, and my son stands up and says, "That's my dad. That's my dad." And I'm like, damn right. And this country who stood up and they came after it, and some of them, you know who they are, and you know the TV station that did it, wanted to try and mock that or whatever. I'll tell you what, millions of people said, "We ride at dawn for Gus." I'll tell you that they were ready to go. And that basic humanity, that basic decency, and for me to see it on a very human, they were there for us as individuals and as people and sharing our stories together. And I have to tell you, leaving Chicago, I've been through enough of these. I kind of get the feel of the play. I thought we were going to win. And I think it's for all of its kind, not arrogantly, but just like decency's going to win out here is what it felt like. And I still believe that. I still believe that. And I think we just have to do more to convince people that it matters, that going on that day and casting your vote matters.
So coming out of Chicago, you thought you were going to win. I will tell you probably that most people in this crowd thought you were going to win. Were you surprised when you got beat?
Yeah, I was. And I've been through these. I remember in 2016, Donald Trump won my congressional district by 17 points. And it was midnight. And in 2016, it was midnight. And my team was there. And I was up by 60 votes. And they said, "Congressman, there's one county yet to count." And I said, "Well, if it's Jackson, we're all looking for work." And they said, "It's not Jackson, it's Mower," which is Austin, the most traditional
trade union town.
Great union town, home of Hormel. It's the heart and soul of that. Many generations of labor or whatever. And we ended up winning. But that was the first time since 1928, maybe, that Austin went for Donald Trump. In the county, Mower went for Donald Trump, and that's when the switch happened. I won that congressional district, the 22 counties of that, in 2008 by over 30 percentage points. In 2016, I won it by a few thousand, and Donald Trump won by 17. That's the traditional, and you know the story. It's here too. It's in those counties, and we just have to figure that out. And the thing that breaks my heart is whether it's agriculture or whether it's labor, this is the most anti-agricultural farmer administration and anti-labor that we've seen. So maybe folks aren't voting on their economics, maybe they're voting on something else. So,
do you ever think about running for president?
No, I have not. But what I do think we need to, and I tell people this, if anybody tells you they're running for president, especially right now, that's a bad thing. But like I said again, I don't think it hurts to have Pete Buttigieg on TV every night. I don't think it hurts to have Gretchen Whitmer. I don't think it hurts to have these members of Congress, these senators out there, that we just have to fill the zone and make the case and be proud of the policies that we care about and, God, get something done. I'll tell you what the American public doesn't want to have with this administration. I don't think that this administration cares about sternly worded letters. I'm just telling you that. I don't think they care. So stand up and do some things, lead on this, be there, make a difference.
So as you know, Governor Evers is standing down. There's an open race for governor of Wisconsin. And our residency laws are pretty flexible.
You got plenty of good ones here. We'll get them elected.
So I just want to make sure you're not open to coming over and making a run for governor of Wisconsin.
You got good ones here. We'll get them elected. But this is going to be big. You're
It
right.
is a big one here, and it's
Big
a very
one.
important one. You going to run for re-election in Minnesota?
We'll make a decision here this coming week. No one's ever got 3 terms in Minnesota. We don't have term limits. No one's gotten those terms. I will say that I'm not arrogant enough to think I'm the only person who can do this, but I'm also, it sure doesn't feel like now's the time to leave a field with what's going on. I think everybody out there is saying.
Some will take that as a newsworthy comment.
No decision yet, but
I understand. Hey, we're coming around the corner, but these people seem to like you so much. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. Is that okay? All right.
It's not the Minnesota nice, the passive aggressive like you. I was going to say it's so great to have you all here, so engaged in your community, but then I'm wondering it's maybe you just don't have a social life, like me. So.
You know, my mom is a good Wisconsinite. We're not so braggy, so we don't have a Wisconsin nice thing or something like that. But my mom always says that, my beloved 94-year-old mom, she always says that we're always nice to their face.
Yeah.
But after they leave,
yeah,
says just so you know, you better do well here because
I would like her. I would like her though.
Yeah. Hey, yeah, you would like my mom. So my favorite thing you did in the 2024 presidential campaign was kind of like fix up your car. And the big thing about it was you had a 1979, I think it was 79 vehicle. And
international.
Yeah. And I thought this could in fact be BS. Right? Yeah. We don't know. This guy from Minnesota, you can't always trust him. And
fake. So, I apparently was a Manchurian candidate, that the Chinese work. Yeah.
And so you're fixing it up. And the thing that sold me on you was that you had a car, the band The Cars, you had a cassette.
I did.
And I think it was a cassette.
8-track,
even better. And so
Columbia House, I never did pay them for it. And so some of you know. Yeah.
Revelation,
well, for a penny.
the statute of limitations, but you had The Cars with Rick Ocasek and Ben Orr and all these people. And that was so spot on accurate, right? That in fact, if you had that vehicle in 1979, you're going to have a Cars.
I'm pretty impressed by this. This is good, deep knowledge here.
This is real. We're not fooling around anymore. And
have we agreed that the Cars debut album was the best debut album, top to bottom?
I think pretty close.
Oh, who's that? Somebody knows.
Yeah. And but you also held out the band Boston is pretty.
I did. That was a good
as well.
one. Yeah.
So anyway, this is the thing. When you're driving around in 1979, listening to the Cars and Candy-O or whatever's playing, you're probably not thinking you're going to be spending a lot of time with rock stars. But when you get to be the nominee for Vice President of the United States, you actually get to hang out with rock stars. So
it's a perk. That is a perk.
It is, because you're into me. You are into it.
You
right?
are.
And so what I want to know is your best rock star story from the 2024 campaign.
Yes. 2. One is the campaign tells me, and it's young campaign staffers. So I don't blame them. They just didn't know. But they said, Governor, you've been using this John Mellencamp music, as your walkout song, but we got a call and we had a request at the convention if after you get your nomination, if we could play, this artist asked if you could play his music. And I said, really? Yeah. And this young staffer said, yeah, this guy named Neil Young wants you to play Rockin' in the Free World. And I'm like, what'd you say? He said, Neil Young wants you to play Rockin' in the Free World and you get nominated. And I just turned to my wife. I said, I can die now. I am perfectly, that's it. But
it's done.
But
I have achieved it.
The one where I didn't get to meet Neil in that case, but we're doing an event down in, I think, Atlanta or Savannah, and it was in the hold room. I spent a lot of time back by dumpsters, and they issue in, and the Secret Service, I couldn't see anybody and all this, whatever, but we're going down a hallway, and I looked down the hall, and the door was kind of open, and they're playing music in there, and I looked down there, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going there. And the Secret Service said, no. I said, I'm going to go down there. And I walked to the door, and the individual who was there singing waves me in. And it was Michael Stipe from REM playing with John Bon Jovi and Parliament, and they were practicing what they were going to sing, and I sat there and watched them, these musicians, as they were doing that. And those of you, again, of a certain age, REM was college music beyond anything we could ever imagine. And there was Michael Stipe, and I fanboyed the crap out of it. I'm like, oh my God. It was a little embarrassing, but I said, and he said, well, what song do you want to hear? I said, well, I'd like to hear Driver 8. He said, I haven't played Driver 8 in decades. And I said, well, he went out and sang Driver 8 with John Bon Jovi in Parliament. And so that's really cool. Really cool.
You get to hang out with the Parliament Funkadelic thing.
Yeah, and that's it.
That's it. That's a pretty
And
good
now I
person.
just name drop. Oh, yeah, when I was hanging out with Michael Stipe, this is what we did. I hope he remembers me. So
We've talked about a lot of stuff tonight, and you've been very generous with your comments on it. As we said earlier, this has been a pretty tough week. But backstage, we were talking about, and you were asking me about the people who had appeared this week.
Yeah.
And you said, was this person optimistic? Did they, and I said, well, a little bit down there, and the other person a little bit up, and stuff like that. And it is a time where a lot of people are really wrestling. And as we circle around to the end here, let me ask you, at the end of the day, do we make it through?
Yeah.
Do we get to the other side? Are you optimistic about where this country is going?
Yes. Supervised the lunchroom for 20 years. I'm an optimist. And so, no, I am. And I think you need to gather in spaces like this. Look, it's very hard emotionally. I went last weekend from that little boy's funeral to a wedding, and I think this idea of, in this moment, where do we find our joy? Where do we find our purpose? And I'll close us out with another of those great rock poets or whatever. Bruce Springsteen was right. It ain't no sin to be glad you're alive. And we're alive. We got a chance to change this. We have a chance to make a difference. And I think in the midst of this heartache and turmoil, we can do it. There's always reasons to show gratitude. Every morning I wake up, express great gratitude that I'm not a Republican, for starters. And then, so there you go. So.
Ladies and gentlemen, the governor of Minnesota, my vice president at the moment, Tim Walz.
Thank you. Thank you.
You've been listening to Civic Media's coverage of Cap Times 2025 Idea Fest. Thank you to Luke Mathers, Dominic Lee, Parker Olson, Dan Schaefer, and Todd Albaugh for making this broadcast possible. I'm Aaron Zommers, and we now return you to your regularly scheduled Civic Media programming.
On your entertainment beat, I'm Pete Schwaba. Superman and Lex Luthor teaming up together? What is this world coming to? Before you know it, cats and dogs will be living together. Variety has announced that the sequel for this summer's hit Superman is in motion.